Just for context, this is a TikTok video that I posted about trans healthcare and a bill signed by Greg Abbott in Texas, essentially considering it to be child abuse to give children hormone blockers or surgery. I said that this was largely bigoted because hormone therapy is largely considered safe and reversible. And someone by the name of CatCattinson, who has about 30,000 followers on TikTok, commented saying that this is dangerous misinformation and we should speak. I would link the comment, but after we eventually had our conversation, she got banned from TikTok the next day. This is the conversation that we had.
Your name's Kat, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, essentially you sort of commented on my video about, I guess I could call it trans activism. And
Okay.
I'm not familiar with your work, but it does look like you are, you would consider yourself a detransitioner. Is that a fair word to use? So
Yeah.
you used to identify as a trans man, and then you detransitioned
Mm-hmm.
back into your birth sex. Is that fair to say?
Correct.
Okay. So
Yeah.
you took issue with a couple things that I was saying, and I looked through a couple of your videos, and it seems like you take issue with a lot of things that I believe in, which is like a difference between sex and gender, validating trans people's existences. Is that fair to say? I don't want to take your.
No, I do believe there's a difference between sex and gender.
Okay.
I believe there are two sexes. I'm a major. I'm a molecular, cellular, and developmental biology major,
Mm-hmm.
and so I've taken quite a few biology and chemistry classes, and it has been my understanding throughout my entire education that sex is binary, and so I believe in two sexes, and I kind of take issue with the idea that gender is a spectrum, but I understand gender to be the roles that our society places on males and females. Sex is the biological, and gender is like what society
The
has made
social.
up about the
Sure.
social. I agree with that concept. I just I don't agree that you can then extrapolate that and say that identifying as the social aspect of another gender that's what makes you that gender, and that then you should be able to start living as the opposite sex.
Okay, so
Like,
I guess my
so
question is,
that's the part I disagree with.
sure. I guess what I would say is what does it mean then to be a woman? Because what I would say is there is definitely some social aspects to being a woman, and you're absolutely right that there is a biological reality of being female, but never in society when you engage with a person, you're engaging with them with their sex. Because you're not sure what my sex is, and I'm not sure what your sex is. And it's honestly probably fair to say that we don't even know what our own sex is, because I've never gotten my chromosomes tested, and I'm not sure if you are too. We all use like social cues to determine how another person lives. Like I look at you and I go, oh, okay, long hair, how do I say this? Like not defined chin, like a softer chin, and like I look at you and I go, oh, probably a woman, right? So I'm going to treat her like a woman. And I use these sort of social cues, and I don't use any biological reality. I'm not sure what your chromosomes or genitals are, and I don't think it's relevant to the conversation either to bring them up.
Can you explain what you mean by treating me like a woman?
Yeah, for sure. So I hear how that sounds for sure. Treating you like a woman, treating me like a man. I do think that there are like social realities that unfortunately our sort of brains are hardwired to do, which is like put people into categories. And that's very frustrating for a lot of reasons, but especially when it comes to like sexuality. Like how people are sexually attracted to is almost exclusively based off gender and not sex. I think, yeah.
I strongly disagree with that.
Why is that?
Because, when you think about heterosexuality, homosexuality, up until the last, let's see, John Money, who was a sex researcher and also a pedophile apologist, his other research was on that there are ethical pedophiles and like not ethical pedophiles.
Sure.
But he was the one who came up with the concept of gender identity.
Okay.
And up until that point, but let me just finish my point about sexuality. So up until that point, and honestly still today, homosexuals are attracted to other individuals based on biological sex. Heterosexuals are attracted to the opposite sex. It has never been homogender. It has never been, because people have had a variety of, personal expression no matter what their biological sex is. Like, for instance, butch lesbians, feminine gay men, but the attraction is on the basis of biological sex, and this has been shown in studies as well.
I'd like to get into that. So a couple things. I think it's a little unfair to bring up the fact that he's a pedophile apologist. I'm not sure where a lot of scientists get their, like, what they also do in their free time, but I ascribe to.
Well, that was part of his research.
Sure. Well, I would ascribe to only part of his research then. I wouldn't, and I think that's okay to do. There's a lot of scientists who, might do certain things and not others, and I think I can agree with one and not the other, and that's okay. But what I would definitely say is, if, like, let's just say a trans woman, I don't know if you agree with that, if you might want to use like different language or whatever, but I'm just say like a trans woman gets bottom surgery. What is the difference then between that woman and a cis woman in terms of sexuality? Because they present like a woman, they look like a woman, and they have the genitals of a woman. Isn't it fair to say
sorry, go ahead. You go ahead and finish your question.
No, for sure. Isn't it fair to say then that person is only attracted to someone based off of their, like, what they find is only based off of their gender?
So, okay. First of all, how are you defining woman?
So this is
are you defining it in terms of surgery or having certain body parts?
No, for sure.
What is your definition of woman?
So that's a great question. So I've thought a lot about this, and I think that when people use categories, there's not really a good structural understanding of categories almost ever. Like, if we look at, like, what is a chair, we can look at sort of what makes something a chair. And if you create like a definition, what you might accidentally do is call a cow a chair. And really what chairs do, it's a functional basis. It's not necessarily like a constructional basis, if that makes sense. Like, essentially, we can look at something like a brother. Okay, I have an adopted brother. You can say that there is a biological reality of what a brother means, because it means that we were both entered or exited from the same womb. We can use a very clinical biological definition of that. And that's a very, like, real portion of what a brother means. But we also have this very social understanding of it, which is like, I have a brother because he's always lived with me. I have a brother who we didn't exit from the same womb, and I would never say we're biologically attached to each other, but he's as much my brother as my biological brothers are. And to like sort of differ him from another person feels unfair, or feels like it doesn't acknowledge the social reality of what a brother is. And if someone were to say, okay, well then can anyone be your brother? The answer is kind of, yeah. It's sort of like the social understanding of it. Whoever we define as a brother, there's like some implicit social reasoning, which is like, oh, generally it's someone who, like, you grew up with in your childhood. Generally they consider your parents their parents. Generally, you can use this, but you can use the term brother in any social meaning, and it's okay that it doesn't really have a strict definition.
Well, that's a good point, and I see where you're coming from with that, mm-hmm. But personally, I can't think of any situations where someone would be in danger of having their rights taken away based on referring to brother in a social sense versus biological sense. I mean, even with brother, like, there are some certain instances where it would be important to distinguish between, a biological brother versus social brother. Like, if you were going to donate an organ or, get a blood donation or something, it would be useful to know if the person is actually
for sure
your biological brother.
For sure. And I would agree with the same with the trans women.
I agree with you.
Okay.
I agree with you that you can have, multiple understandings of a term, but where that stops extending to the term woman is that biological females, we have biological differences. Biological males and biological females have differences, and namely, when you look at the statistics for violent crime and sexual assault, it's high 90s of those are committed by men.
For sure. I would
biological males. And so when you start, and then of course, there's differences in physicality. So
generally,
so across the board, every cell in a male body is a male cell.
Right. No, but I was talking about height though. When you talk about like the way that we present in society, there's definitely like women are generally shorter than men. Men are generally stronger than women. Those are general.
I'm not just looking at one factor. For over 99% of people, we can divide people based on male and female are decided by the gametes produced, not actually chromosomes or anything like that. And I mean, we know who's biologically male and biologically female.
I disagree. Like, are you so there's a lot of like are you positive that you have XX chromosomes? That sounds like a silly question.
Female.
Sorry?
I know that I ovulate and bleed once a month.
No, for sure. But there are a lot of like sexual chromosomal diseases where you can
Schreier's, Swires, excuse me, Schreier's.
Yeah.
Swire syndrome. So you can have an XY female if she has a Y chromosome without SRY intact. So there are rare DSDs.
No, for sure. And I fully agree that they're. I fully agree with their
over 99%. For over 99%, 99.98 of the general population biological sex can be determined easily. And biological sex isn't assigned arbitrarily. It's that the doctors can look at a person and correctly classify them as male or female in 99.98% of cases.
Sure. Not necessarily. What I would say is, I think the percentages, I would double check with this, but across all chromosomal genetics where like you don't necessarily present as XY or XX, it's about 2% of the population. It's a little bit higher. I would still say it's rare.
Most of those are not actually ambiguous.
Sure.
Most of them, like Klinefelter is one that gets used a lot, XXY, and that is a male condition. It only affects males.
But then I guess the question is,
vast majority of DSD.
Here's the question. Okay, let's say someone with Klinefelter's disease gets bottom surgery. Why are they still male? Like their chromosomes are not male. Their genitals are not male, and they might not even present in a way that's male. What makes them a male?
A man who gets surgery to have his penis sliced and inverted, that is not the same as a vagina. It's not functionally the same.
I'm not disagreeing.
It's a wound.
Wait, hold on.
Comparing that to a vagina is not. It's not an accurate comparison.
For the reason that they can't give birth, what is the functional?
Well, for a female, your entire biology, like the function of all of your organs, your gonads, your vagina, it's all interrelated, and your body releases like titrated doses of hormones at a certain time.
Sure,
and it's all interrelated. So, a man having a penis inverted, it's just not the same organ at all. It doesn't serve the same function. It doesn't have the effect like on bone density like it does for women, like estrogen levels, and it's just everything is interconnected.
Sure, but you're bringing up all of these like interconnecting parts, right? And I guess your point is if you don't have these interconnecting parts, you're no longer a woman. But I would look at tons of people.
No, that's not my point at all. Plenty of women have had to have hysterectomies.
For sure, that's what I would say.
They're still women.
Why though?
They're still biologically female.
Why biologically? Because I feel like all of these biological factors that you're pointing to, we can strip away and you would still call them female for reasons I'm not sure. and you would still want them referred to in society as women. And I don't necessarily understand that like gravity
But
towards.
What is your basis of believing that someone who is biologically male, who is born a man, and there's a variety of ways of determining that. The main is the gametes produced, eggs or sperm,
Sure.
The type of gonads present, but in rare cases of DSDs, which is different than trans identity, by the way.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm not trying to conflate those two.
Okay, so in this situation, we're talking about someone who is biologically male, and because of having a gender identity that is female, i.e., they believe that they are, psychologically female in a male body.
Sure.
How is that your definition of female? Why is it, them getting bottom surgery how does that make them not a man, just that they believe that they're a woman?
Sure.
Is my question for you.
So what
Why
I would...
do we count them as women?
Yeah, for sure. What I would say is, I'm going to use the term. I'm going to be clear with the way that I'm going to be using the terms. And I feel like you've been using them interchangeably, which is fine. Like language can differ, but I'm just going to say, when I say male and female, I'm going to be referring to like sex. And when I say man or woman, I'm going to be referring to gender. And I think
okay.
Is that okay?
A woman is an adult human female, that it is a sex term as well. It's, it was never intended to be based on gender. Same thing with man.
But like, I don't care about it.
Man is an adult human male, and I don't believe that like gender stereotypes or gender roles should factor into the actual definition of male and female. But I suppose I'm not going to be using them that way because I think it's inaccurate.
Okay,
but
that's fine. But I'll use that. I'll use them in that way. And what I would say is, to prove your point, to go back to that brother example, which is something personal to me because I have an adopted brother. You could say the word brother was used in a very clinical sense. It was basically to just trace the motherhood and like the responsibility of like the finances of the father being distributed evenly to the sons, and that matters for those reasons, and that's the intentionality behind it. But I feel like we've evolved past that point in society where we should care about those intentions and just say, yeah, I understand that the intention is there, but he's my brother because he lives with me. And I don't think anyone would feel okay taking that away just because we don't share the same biology that brothers necessarily would. And I feel like that social aspect is so missing sometimes. And I would say, like, when someone believes them to be women, or they believe themselves to be women, what I would say in some cases is society perceives them to be women as well, where some, like, there's that idea of passing, and there's the idea of like traps or whatever, because people perceive them to be women. And I understand that, like, that idea of stereotypes, but I would say, like, what else does, if we remove all of the stereotypes from society, then men and women should just be the same. And the only difference between us is just what a doctor, or like in a very biological sense, who can produce a child is. Well, then I don't know what else to go on. I don't know what else to go on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think I understand your position, but I mean, there are biological differences between men and women. Humans are animals. Humans have evolutionary biology just like other animals, and there are average differences between males and females that are biologically based.
But I would never disagree with.
We're less sexually dimorphic than other animal species.
I would.
But my point is that I don't believe that just because a man believes he is a woman, or a male identifies as a woman, I don't believe that erases all of the biological differences, and they can just live as a woman like any other woman, because that assumption actually puts women in danger and takes away women's right to private spaces.
Sure. Could I just a quick grapple? I'm just curious, with all your points, how you would differentiate between like me and my adopted brother, because to me that makes total sense. All of your points where it's like we're just gonna erase the fact that we're not like biologically brothers, and then what happens if if I get cancer, does he suddenly think that he can get cancer because we're biologically related? It's like, no, of course not. We would fully understand that there's not a biological component to this. It's fully social. But I think that sometimes if you just keep bringing up these biological differences between us, it feels like you're just trying to say that he's not close to me, or he's not what everyone would consider a brother in society. And it feels like the only person who should matter whether or not we're biologically related is me and him, who are related, and like doctors who are trying to figure out what diseases he might potentially have. And I feel like there's a one-to-one relation here when it comes to males and females.
What do you mean by one-to-one relation?
I'm saying it's a direct comparison. Can you tell me how these are not different, or could you tell me how maybe you
absolutely.
Yeah.
So in the case of your brother, the intention behind that and what that's based on is completely different than a male identifying as female. So in that case, it sounds like your intention is, you want to convey like closeness with this person, and you see them socially as your brother, and that doesn't harm anyone. I mean, especially if you're not like denying biological reality, right? Like in the case of cancer. But the disturbing trend that I see with trans activists, okay, so first of all, when I see the idea that someone who's not a woman can identify as a woman, first of all, that person has been born, they're born biologically male. Mm-hmm. They don't actually know what it's like to be a biological female. They haven't ever lived as a biological female. And like, I'll talk about myself for a second. Like, I identified as a man, and, I believed that I was basically a male. I was a psychological male in a female body, but I didn't know what it was like to live as male. I didn't know, the particular challenges that males face. It's literally impossible for them to understand because they don't experience it. And so then when they're identifying as a woman, what that comes from is identifying with the female gender role, aka gender stereotypes that are associated with being a woman. And so that is very similar to someone like people have failed to debunk the argument that it is the same as identifying a white person identifying as black.
Oh, I could get into that if you'd like.
A 60-year-old identifying as 30. Like, there isn't.
Okay, so
all.
Sorry, there's 2 points, and I want to address each, so I don't want to because there's 2 points. The first thing, which is you're saying I would never understand what it's like to be a man, and I would say to me, what it means to be a man has nothing to do with the genitals that I have on my body. What it has to do with, and a lot of trans men would say, oh, shit, I didn't realize that this is what it's like. It's like, having to be conscious when you walk through the street that people are sort of turning away from you because they want to be safe. Or being told not to cry. Or, I'm trying to think of other examples, but like those sort of social ideas of what it means to be a man, or like how dating apps can interact with you, that like men are often seen as like the antagonized or like aggressor sometimes in dating scenes, but women are meant to be like the person who just sort of like accepts all of it and then can differentiate between all of the different partners. There's all of these like social dynamics that if you ask almost any trans person, they would say, I wasn't even expecting all of these like social understandings. Now I can totally understand why men feel and react this way and women feel and react this way, because socially we treat these two genders differently. And I would probably say that that's a bad thing, but that is probably a social reality that we face. And that's what it means to be a man, is the fact that, we're always told to be the strong person, and it's like it's not okay for us to not want to work and like take care of kids, or it's not okay for us to be at home. And I think these are
stereotypes. But those stereotypes harm people.
I would fully agree. So
why are we crafting identities like based on these stereotypes? Like, I fit into like this set of expectations for men better than I do for the ones for women, so I'm a man. Like why don't we just abolish gender and biological sex? Like it does matter in certain situations, and we need to acknowledge it. But like I'm in agreement with you that like why don't we treat everybody the same? Like, I mean, other than like, I do believe that single sex spaces are crucial in certain situations, and that I don't advocate for abolishing. But in terms of like the social rules, the aesthetic choices, like that, I absolutely agree with. Should be less important in society. So when we're basing whole identities on this, like, well, I'm a woman because I fit into this set of social expectations, or this is aesthetic, like that's only upholding those expectations then.
I guess all I can say is if you're frustrated with the fact that gender harms people, and I would honestly probably agree with you. I would say that I would probably consider myself a gender abolitionist too. It feels weird that you're targeting, or seemingly targeting is probably an unfair word to use, but why are we going after trans people who are the biggest people who are harmed by this idea of gender, where they sort of grow up and they're like, all these ways that people are treating me, I don't feel associated with. And the way that my body looks, the way that like I'm told I can't wear makeup, or like the way that my chin feels, or like the way that my clothes are worn, all of that stuff needs to be broken away. And if we break all of that away, and we just say, you know what, go do whatever you want to do. Go do whatever you want to do. We're not even gonna say men and women. We're just gonna say people, and we're not gonna associate any ideas with men and women. And what's up? Sorry.
Well, no, we need the terms men and women because
Why?
biological sex sex is important in situations. We have words for
we're talking past each other. I would say male and female. We could still use male and female.
But it's adult human female, adult human male. Like every species of animal, we have a word to refer to the male and the female of the species.
We use male and female,
and when they are a child. Well, no, like we have. Let's see, like female, we have a word for like female cows, and the adult male is a bull.
Sure,
and
but
there's a similar word for every single other species, and so
that's not.
It's just, I think we need to remove the stereotypes that are included in the word woman and included in the word man, and just reduce it down to the literal definition of woman and man, rather than including like all these toxic stereotypes in the definition.
So I guess my question is,
the terms themselves are useful terms that are important in certain situations.
Yeah. So I guess my question is, if we break down all of that idea and we just say like, okay, you're a man and you're a woman, and we're drawing a line there. We're saying you're a man, you're a woman, but you can do whatever you want. And a man says, you know what, I like wearing makeup. And a man says, you know what, I like wearing a dress. And a man says, you know what, I don't even like the way that my genitals look. I want to create as you would call it, which I would frankly kind of disagree with the wording, a wound down there. That's their decision because they're an adult, right? They consented to it. I don't understand. And everyone around them, they look at them, they picture them, they keep saying woman. They keep using the terms she, her. And this man, as you would call them, is basically just saying, I don't see a difference between men and women. What is the difference between men and women? How is he any different from any other person, any other woman around him?
Well, okay, first of all,
or any other woman around him.
I find it offensive as a woman who has, who's in a female body and isn't choosing it. For one thing, I was just born into the body that I was born into. For someone to appropriate a vagina and say that
they're not appropriating. They're just saying, I like this. I just like the stereotypes of what
that's where it crosses over. I was totally with you when you're talking about wanting to wear a dress, wanting to wear makeup. Like, I don't believe that those things should even be associated with being a woman. I believe they should just be aesthetic, like fashion choices that anyone equally should be able to like adopt, right? But
which trans activists would agree with you.
When you cross over, they say they agree with me, but in a moment, like I'll bring up how you asked me why I'm attacking trans people, and I want to address that in a second.
Sure.
But so kind of lost my train of thought.
You're good. I'm sorry.
Anyway, when you crossed over into from then I want to get surgery. I don't like my genitals, right? So that is where you are crossing over into a mental illness. It is gender dysphoria. It's similar to like body dysmorphia, or there's I don't remember the name of it right now, but there's a condition where you feel like an amputee
Yeah,
inside. You feel like you shouldn't have your arm or you shouldn't have your leg or whatever.
for
And
sure.
I feel like by doctors, first of all, the surgical complications are not small. If you
Sure.
watch the accounts of people having these procedures and how much pain they suffer, and like I know that that's not my business, but when you look at all other fields of psychology and medicine, it's like there's no other field of medicine where we are affirming mental illnesses. For instance, someone with anorexia, we are not, affirming that they are fat because they believe that they're fat and telling them you should lose more weight. Or like someone with body dysmorphia, or like we're not telling someone that, well, it's your choice. You should just be able to cut off your arm, if you feel like it, because, it's a functional part of your body. And similarly, the genitals are way more than just sexual. Like your body is an ecosystem, and there's all kinds of health risks
Sure.
that can come from these surgeries and from cross-sex hormones, and just the research showing that it is effective long term and that it's safe is it's very contested. It's not like a really solid body of research, and a lot of it is based on studies with a moderate to high risk of bias. So I don't see a solid
Sure.
body of evidence for that. And I understand and fully like sympathize with people that are uncomfortable in their body, because I've literally been through that. I've experienced that. And like, I have actually immense compassion for those people. But I do think it's the medical field's responsibility to practice evidence-based medicine and do no harm,
Sure.
and
But
that's not how I see it.
sure. But sometimes, like, a couple things. One, body dysmorphia is a great example. Like someone with phantom limb, like people come back from war and they have their arm just was completely blown off, right? And are you familiar with phantom limbs? Like the idea that like, yeah, you get like a scratch there and you can't itch it and it makes you want to like legitimately kill yourself. It's a very strict mental disorder. Now, what I would never discourage people from doing is going to therapy to make sure that you feel comfortable in your body. But what we found helps people with their mental illnesses so much is literally like creating prosthetics for them to just simulate having an arm, and then the phantom limb goes away. Or
adding something is very different than cutting off the arm. I just wanted to throw that in there.
Sure, but your claim was like we don't affirm. And what I would say, I would even take it to your extreme, which is like, let's say someone wants to cut off their arm, okay? Because for some reason, for them, they look at their hand and they just start screaming. They freak out and they're like, I want to kill myself. And to be fair, I also think we're ignoring the harm of how many transgender people kill them or attempt to kill themselves, because it's startling. It's like 40% of their population has attempted suicide once, and that's ignoring the people who have succeeded. And I do want to bring that into the conversation because that is important to bring up. But what I would say is if someone looked at their hand and they continued saying, I feel like this is not my hand, let's say it's like colored weird or something like that, and it's like, this doesn't feel a part of my body. It's like, okay, well, let's go to therapy. Let's see if we can resolve this. And if they can't resolve it, if they are saying, I have suicidal feelings constantly once a day, and we have a breadth of research to show that, if you cut off your arm, it actually makes you feel much better about yourself. And it makes you like, there's a possibility that people won't, for sure. But, maybe that's an okay decision to make.
I disagree that there's a solid body of research on this. It's still extremely experimental.
No, I'm not talking about the surgeries themselves. I'm just saying when you poll transgender people and you say how many people, how much more comfortable do you feel with your body, the numbers plummet, or the numbers increase significantly on a general basis. And I would obviously say you're probably the exception where you transition and then you feel less comfortable with your body, and that's worth bringing up. That's worth having informed consent about. People should be aware of the fact that this won't necessarily fix all their issues. There is a possibility that you might harm your body in ways that you don't feel comfortable about, and that's your decision to make. And I would say I think we're just ignoring the psychological damage that trans people undergo, and alleviating that is important.
Yes, I agree. Alleviating it is important, but the problem is that what trans advocates have advocated for is easier access to just medical transition to the point where it's easy. It's, in some places it's easier to access hormones and surgeries than it is to access affordable therapy. And we have not done any research. We have not done any research on other approaches to treat gender dysphoria because the trans community, or rather trans activists, I don't like to say trans community because it's not a monolith, right? But trans activists are pushing for it to be illegal. Like in Canada, it's illegal for therapists to practice any other approach besides affirmative care. Any other approach is considered conversion therapy, whether it's cognitive behavioral therapy, DBT, talk therapy, exploratory therapy, that's all illegal in Canada.
Hi there. Sorry, just wanted to pause the video real quick and find the article that she was referring to. She was saying this one, that Canada outlaws conversion therapy. The broadly worded law covers talk therapy for consenting adults. If we pull up the exact bill, we can see that it's essentially outlawing conversion therapy. And if you see how they define it, it's mostly changing a person's gender identity to cisgender, changing a person's gender expression so that it conforms to the sex assigned to that person at birth, which is not something that I would advocate for, or it was really something that I was referring to in the video. I would be perfectly okay with this bill. This seems totally fine when it comes to what we should be banning therapists from advocating for, which is changing a person's gender identity to cisgender, something I do not agree with. It's also worth mentioning that this bill was specifically passed 3 months ago. There have been 0 case laws that I could find where they cite it so far. So any sort of speculation on the bounds of this law and what exactly is considered legal or illegal explicitly would be inappropriate.
Are you saying it's illegal for a therapist to say, okay, hey, I recognize that you're trans. Is there a way that you can look at yourself in the mirror and not want to shoot yourself in the face? Is there a way that, like, maybe we can be comfortable with the way that you look? Are you saying that would be illegal for a therapist to sort of explore? That, yes. I would have to get, I honestly, okay, if that's true, which I honestly, I contest. I don't think that that's what exactly the bill is. If that's true, that's inappropriate. Obviously. I think that's the first.
Yeah, I can send you. I was just reading, but I don't have. I have a bunch of resources compiled, more about the puberty blockers and detransition rate that was in your video. I have all that compiled, but I can definitely find those sources for you. It's, especially when it comes to a child, like a minor. It is illegal in Canada for them to question the gender identity at all, or in any way, like even just to say. Because sometimes, gender dysphoria can arise for all different reasons, but a lot of times it can be based in trauma. And as soon as the kid says I'm transgender, it's illegal to question that at all, even knowing that maybe they've been through sexual abuse, they've been through trauma. Like it's illegal to practice any other approach of therapy besides just immediately affirming that identity, even if this is like, a 13-year-old who's been sexually abused or something.
Well, I think it's important to tell the kid, hey, I think that you probably want to look this way. Is there a way that we can, sort of make yourself more okay with the way that you do look, and maybe, see if we can work on your suicidal feelings, suicidal ideation just a little bit. I think that's perfectly appropriate and probably the best first step. But I guess the question is, what happens if that doesn't work? Like, are you okay? Like, how could you not be okay with them saying, I feel suicidal constantly. I don't feel like I can face my classmates. I don't like the way that society is treating me. I don't feel okay in my body. I feel like it's not my body. I wake up every day and I look in the mirror and I cry. And these are very real feelings. These are like gender dysmorphia. There's a reason it's in the DSM-5. It's a real problem in society. Don't you think that it should be okay to say, okay, maybe we should get you on some puberty blockers. Maybe we can sort of like adjust the way that you look in some way because we've gone through this route and it doesn't seem to be benefiting you in any way. And we don't want you to kill yourself.
No. I mean, I think that their psychological discomfort should absolutely be taken seriously. I think that we need to do research into better treatment methods for this condition.
Like what?
I believe that they support. Well, like I've heard from many people that cognitive behavioral therapy or dialectical behavioral therapy worked for them to treat their gender dysphoria, but
Sure.
This is an approach that's not even being explored at all because the push for affirmative care and medical procedures is so intense. And I just want to, so I thought our conversation would be, more about specifically kids transitioning rather than like the entire trans issue, which it's fine that
Sure.
we've like talked about
No,
this,
we can move the conversation.
I do want to address your point that I somehow, don't care about trans people or that I'm attacking the community also because, I don't see it that way at all or feel any negativity towards trans people whatsoever.
To be clear, I said the word attacking and then I took it back. And then I said, that's probably unfair to put on your position. And then I also said that it's important to bring up the fact that trans people are suffering. That's all I mentioned. I didn't accuse you of anything.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I have brought up that they're suffering, and gender dysphoria is something that I myself I struggled with for over 20 years, and I know many trans people as well. There's trans people that even today support me, and not everyone has like the same opinions, but so on the surgery. So surgeries are being performed as young as 13 years old. I have a study on this. Sorry, let me find it.
You're good.
It's called Chest Reconstruction in Transmasculine Minors and Young Adults, and this was published in JAMA Pediatrics in 2018 by Olson Kennedy et al. And this show. So this was back in 2018, so we know that there's probably a lot more kids that have been through this procedure since then. But this is a double mastectomy on, 13-year-old biological females. And first of all, this is very experimental. As far as surgeries being performed this young, we have essentially no evidence that it actually improves gender dysphoria or quality of life. Same thing with puberty blockers. They're very experimental. It was a practice that was begun without clinical trials. The studies that do exist don't have control groups. So they're uncontrolled studies.
To be clear, puberty blockers have been approved by the FDA specifically for people who are
no, they haven't for gender dysphoria.
Correct. I was going to go in there, but like puberty blockers are absolutely FDA approved for people who are just experiencing puberty at an early age.
But that's different. But that's a very different situation, right? Because
sure, but
they're at a different age. They're younger, and even people that took puberty blockers for other conditions, not gender dysphoria, Lupron is one of the drugs used as a puberty blocker for other conditions. And they've had, I think it was a $785 million lawsuit. They've had multiple lawsuits over. They've had thousands of deaths from people that use this drug, and this is one of the drugs that were given to kids, and these are people that only took it for months.
Hey, just wanted to quickly pause the video one more time and talk about this report that she was referring to. Thousands of deaths linked to drugs used as puberty blockers for gender-confused kids. If we pull this up, it says the UK National Health Service is investigating drugs. Let's take a look at this one. Looks like the site can't be reached. Okay, interesting. Well, the FDA did list over 41,000 adverse reactions associated with this drug. Let's see what this pulls up. Okay, nothing. That's okay. Let's go ahead and pull up this because the investigation that it linked to, let's find out what exactly the conclusion to it was. The conclusion was that the expert evidence provided by the respondents was partisan and had been accepted by the court even though it had been given by those without relevant experience, untested, and contrary to that advanced by the appellant. As an example, it cited Professor Neil Evans, whose post is in a veterinary school and whose key experience in the field is the study of the endocrine systems of sheep. If we also pull up, there was a specific report talking about this figure, the 6,370 deaths, and where exactly that came from. It looks like it was to treat individuals with prostate cancer, not as a curative treatment. There was no study done. That's just a big smorgasbord of reports. And so the problem with that is if you don't even know that those deaths are connected to the agent they are reported to be connected to. They wouldn't even be using it if they weren't at risk of death. It was specifically used just for people who were suffering with prostate cancers to make the cancer a little bit easier for them to control.
Typically, these kids took it for are taking them for years. to suppress puberty. And we have no body of research that shows this is safe. In fact, there aren't a lot of studies, but we already do have evidence that it causes impaired cognitive function, osteopenia, and of course infertility.
Sure.
And
for sure. But
so I don't believe that there's enough evidence. I mean, first of all, kids can't consent to irreversible body changes
of course not.
Puberty blockers as young as age 10, and they are not reversible. They're absolutely not reversible. The NHS used to say they were reversible, and now they actually don't say that anymore.
Right.
And several other countries have stopped prescribing puberty blockers because of some of the insights we're gaining via research. And so I don't believe it's an ethical practice. I do believe it's abusive.
I have a question.
Put a child through this. Yes.
I have just like an ethical question. Let's just say for the sake of argument, hypothetically, there was some sort of like disease or something, okay, and it's affecting kids, and that disease is killing about 40% of the children who acquire it. But there's this sort of experimental drug, and the downside to that drug, it does seem to be curative, but the downsides to the drug is there's like a 10% chance, or probably even lower, that I would have to look at the numbers, that they might do some harm to their body. But doesn't look like they're dying. Like, wouldn't you say it's ethically appropriate?
Well, I mean, people have died from taking puberty blockers, though. Like, people have actually died.
People have died and it's still on the market? How many people?
Yes. There have been 1,500 deaths, over 25,000 adverse cases related to Lupron.
Well, I wouldn't say adverse. I'm looking for deaths.
No, 1,500 have died.
Right.
So, I mean, there are people dying from these drugs. So
okay.
There's that. But also, so the thing with gender dysphoria is the kids aren't actually dying of gender dysphoria. First of all, that statistic, the 40%, is based off of a questionnaire.
Yeah.
I believe that's the one based off of a questionnaire.
Yeah, it's how many trans people.
It's based on self-reporting. It's not based on actual attempts.
But wait, hold on.
No, I'm not saying that's incorrect. I'm just saying it's not the best methodology. But not
how else would you get that information though? Because we don't mark gender on a death certificate. We don't know how many trans people have actually killed themselves. So if we want to look at like the numbers, the best way to ask is, of the transgender people or people who are facing gender dysphoria, let's look at the suicide rates amongst those people. Amongst the general population, it's like 5%, and amongst transgender people, it's like 40. It's like 35.
Right.
And that's
I mean, I acknowledge that it's probably higher than the general population, but also a lot of these people, I believe it's around 80% of people with gender dysphoria also have other comorbid mental health conditions.
Sure.
So I don't, so it's just not the most accurate way of measuring, because, you can't really prove correlation versus causation. You can't prove that.
I'm not trying to imply causation.
Gender dysphoria, the gender dysphoria that's, resulting from that, because these people do, the vast majority of the time have other issues as well.
Sorry, I'm not trying to imply causation. All I'm saying is, okay, if we look at one group, it looks like it's like 40% have attempted suicide, and then you look at after transition, after they feel like they've been approved, accepted by society as the gender that they feel, that the numbers decrease significantly to like 10%, like almost just about near the regular population, and that to me is worth it. That the fact that like people aren't killing themselves anymore, I would never say. I totally understand the idea of informed consent. I totally understand the idea that it's important to be aware of the risks that you should go in. And if people aren't informing you that you can't be infertile after going through gender affirmation surgery, that's a problem. Okay, you need to be aware of the risks, of course. But I don't know any scientists who would disagree.
But just puberty blockers can make you infertile. And especially of the children that go on puberty blockers, almost 100% of them go on to cross-sex hormones.
Oh,
right.
Okay.
So they're on as young as age 10. They are starting on a train that is only goes one direction, right? So I don't think that a 10-year-old, for one thing, fertility preservation treatments aren't even available at that age, or at 11, 12, 13, probably even 14. I talked to a 16-year-old on TikTok who had gone on puberty blockers at 16 and at 19 is infertile.
Sure.
So I don't believe that these kids can consent to that. I don't believe they can consent to, a drop in IQ, deficits in cognitive function, osteoporosis. I don't think that kids, I don't think kids can consent to irreversible body changes at all. I mean, we don't allow kids to get a tattoo. We don't allow kids to join the military.
Sure, but the problem with that analogy is that if you don't get a tattoo, you're not going to kill yourself. I think that is so important. And we aren't testing other methods of care. Like we're looking at it in this very black and white way. Like, if they don't get the treatment, they will kill themselves. But I don't believe that. Like, I think they need support, absolutely. But kids have had suicidal tendencies and mental health problems for a long time. And we need to just improve, we need to improve the mental health care that is available and, test other methods, because, destroying these kids' brains and bones and, and making them infertile, it's not an ethical solution to this problem. And, I don't believe the research is clear long-term that it improves mental health long-term. I think that maybe in the short term, if you give someone something they believe is going to help them, it's called a placebo effect. And we don't have controlled studies on this, so we don't know that the perceived mental health benefits are actually because the treatment helps with gender dysphoria, or if it's simply because of the placebo effect. Sure,
we cannot rule that out.
Sure, but the placebo effect, how would you even create a placebo for the way that I'm being interacted by in society? How could you even fake that to a human brain and just say, oh, these people are accepting me as the way that I would like to be accepted? I don't understand how a trial could even go through that process. And what I would also say is I hear a lot that this idea of putting someone on hormone blockers is considered child abuse. This
it's human experimentation.
Couldn't you also say that someone who is going through such suicidal ideation on a consistent basis, and we have a cure for them that seems to drastically fix a significant portion of the trans community, wouldn't that also be considered child abuse, that you just leave them at will and you're like, well, we're gonna try this?
I'm not suggesting not giving them help. That's not my suggestion at all. I just think we need to explore other treatment methods.
But I would never disagree. I said if Canada is doing what you're saying they're doing, and you just can't give CBT or DBT to someone with gender dysphoria, that's a problem. That's okay, sure. Legitimate. Well then I would say that that's a bad law. Okay, I would say that that's you should probably affirm their identity and also find ways that they can accept the body that they're in. And if that doesn't work, if that doesn't seem to be working, if their suicide ideation does not seem to be reduced in any significant way, they still look in the mirror and they want to punch themselves in the face because of how they look. And they're like, you know what? Maybe we just sort of need to change how you look.
Yeah, I don't agree that, because I'm also thinking about other treatments for other types of conditions, and other mental health conditions. Gender dysphoria is a mental health condition.
Yeah. And
anorexia, we're not treating anorexia by allowing people to starve themselves because it. I've experienced. I've had an eating disorder.
But there's a harm. There's a real harm. I don't know. I don't know how much I agree with that analogy.
Or the analogy with cutting off body parts.
Yeah.
You are harming your body with these treatments, and
if we're
and in no other psychological condition do we affirm that mental illness with body modification.
I think
we don't treat body dysmorphia with plastic surgery. We would think that's ridiculous. And, honestly, there haven't been a lot of studies on social transition from what I've read. But, I personally, I think that that living as the opposite gender, or like attempting to live as the opposite gender, particularly when you don't pass, is, it makes the gender dysphoria worse, not better in the long run.
I just have a question for you.
Okay.
How would you suggest we use pronouns? Like, do you just would you suggest just like whatever you feel like is best for when you look at someone, you just go, oh, they look like a he, so I'm going to say he? Because you look at me and I assume you're going to say he, right? You have no idea my sex. You didn't.
I mean, I can unless you have been through extensive testosterone, and even then, yeah. I mean, honestly, I think I can clock most people.
For sure.
I'm not saying that to sound, but there's a particular vocal quality of trans-identified females who have taken testosterone.
Sure.
So I'd say with about 99.98% certainty that you're a biological male.
Sure.
And that's how it is for most of the population.
What I would say is,
if someone does pass completely, I mean, like I'm surprisingly good at telling, who's biologically male and biologically female, as most humans are. But yes, if someone does pass and like goes under my radar, then like it's possible that I would incorrectly sex someone.
Sure. What I would say, so I had a roommate of mine who had a very high pitched voice, and whenever he was on the call, whenever he was on the phone, or whenever he was on the drive-through, he got called a she all of the time. It was a very consistent problem for him, and it frustrated him to no avail. He was like, I am a man. And you see this all the time. Like, you see people not really sure. You look at someone and you're like, I'm actually not sure. And I would never say that we aren't able to clock someone pretty consistently. But I would say, I think we should move towards that thing where it's like, oh, if they say that they're a man, we'll just say that they're a man, because you don't know and you might get it wrong. And like, you think anyone who says they are a woman should be allowed into women's spaces and counted as a woman? For sure. For the big reason, for statistically, like the amount of sexual assault that happens towards trans people versus by trans people, it's very much geared towards the first. The former, not the latter.
We've let in, this is as of 2021, but we've let in over 250 convicted male rapists into women's prisons because of self-ID laws.
Uh-huh.
And
I'm not familiar with that.
There's currently a lawsuit going on because I believe a woman in California was impregnated by a male rapist that was allowed into women's prisons. And, these aren't just your average like trans-identified males or trans women who have gender dysphoria and just want to feel better. These are convicted felons, convicted rapists who are... In California now, it's the law that you can say you identify as a woman and choose what prison to go to.
Sure. And
then the same thing, with locker rooms. There was a convicted sex offender in an LA spa. This happened a few months ago, but he was in a locker room with girls and women, and he exposed himself to them and was basically perving out on these women. And little girls as well.
Sure.
And a woman complained to the front desk and said, there's a man in there being creepy and exposing himself to women. Okay. And they said, well, there's nothing we can do about this because he said he identifies.
There's nothing. There's nothing that they can do about him this person creating a sexual crime to another person.
They said there was nothing they could do because
they were exposing their genitals to another person, and they weren't able to arrest this person for committing a crime. After a good amount of Googling, I was really unable to find any this story at all of what she's referring to, but I could find a bunch of stories like this. So that's super cool.
Well, later, after the incident,
I think the problem here is the sexual assault, not the.
They were a registered sex offender, but see, that's the thing is being a man in a female only space and exposing your genitals to women, that is a sexual crime.
Sure.
So someone who just says they're a woman because they identify as a woman,
I think my problem. I think my problem with a lot of this is I know a couple trans people who have not had bottom surgery, who have this ability to do what you're describing. Obviously, I'm not friends with any, assaulters. However, they have never been stopped from going into a bathroom because people look at that person and they go, that is a woman. Of course they should go in here. And I think that sometimes we forget what exactly trans people can look like. And if we just do it off of like what they sort of their appearance, like how many trans men would you say need to go into the women's bathroom? Because you look at trans men and it's like, damn, dude, I do not feel comfortable around that person in a woman's space. And they go, hey, I was born biologically a female. Shouldn't you be okay with this? And I think that sort of disconnect sometimes. Like, I think that more people would be uncomfortable with a trans man being in their bathroom than a trans woman. Does that make sense? Especially like,
yeah, it does make sense. And I'm not saying there doesn't need to be a solution to this problem. Like, I think that maybe the trans community needs to be pushing for separate bathrooms.
So it sounds like
or separate prisons. Like, I'm not saying, like, I agree male violence is a problem, and I do not want a gender nonconforming or trans identified man to feel unsafe in a bathroom. Like, I don't want any of that, but I don't believe that taking away women's rights and protections. Same thing with the sports teams, right? Like,
it sounds
Leah
like
Thomas she went from being ranked 500 in the men's team to number 1 in the women's, and that's obviously not fair. Do I think Leah shouldn't be able to do sports? No, like, it's just that we need better solutions that are helping trans people, but trans identified people, but they're also not taking away from women's rights and women's safety, and that's what I am pushing back on.
I guess all I'll say, I'm gonna go back to your original point for just a little bit because I felt like I wasn't able to answer that one. I don't see your solution entailing anything other than, one, basically just shunning anyone who looks or doesn't look like a man at the bathroom, which is going to just let trans women into the bathroom and also deter a significant portion, not a significant, a notable percentage of cis women, or have like a genital check at the bathroom, which feels way more invasive than anything I'm advocating for. And obviously that's not what you're advocating for, but I don't see any solution that you can have to this problem that you're saying exists.
Well, that's for the trans community to figure out, because it's not allowing anyone in women's bathrooms who says they're a woman and not being able to question it, because there have been incidents recorded where someone went into a women's bathroom. This happened. It was a young person. They were a teenager who actually raped a 9-year-old in a woman's bathroom.
Okay.
Who was presenting as a woman but was a male, and so this is happening, and it's unacceptable that that's happening, and so the solution isn't to take away from women's rights. And I don't know exactly what that situation should be, but it's also not my responsibility either. It's the trans activists that supposedly know what the community needs, and they need to be coming up with solutions that don't harm women.
Yeah, but like here's the thing. I feel like I feel like you're sort of ignoring the other side of this, because you're pulling a lot of examples on the one side, and I would never disagree with those examples. But I'd say there's so many more of the other side, where we look at someone who's like a trans woman who essentially just says, I want to be in the women's bathroom, and they say, no, get in the men's bathroom, and they get sexually assaulted there because they look like a woman and people perceive them to be attractive. And those percentages are way higher than the ones that you're describing. And I feel like maybe we should just be against assault. And then
what is your source for seeing for those
percentages?
I'd really like to know.
For sure.
I'd really like to know what that source is and where that's coming from.
Yeah, hold on one moment. Don't necessarily have it up. However, let me look up sexual assault perpetrated against transgender individuals. Perpetrators versus victims. 12% of transgender youth report being sexually assaulted in K through 12 settings by peers or educational staff. 15% of transgender individuals report being sexually assaulted. I don't have any numbers on the perpetrators, but that is a staggering number. That is a staggering number, is what I'll say. 15% of transgender people.
I am aware that I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I absolutely believe that gender nonconforming people, especially gender nonconforming males, are going to face a higher rate of violence than the general population, and that is bigoted, homophobic violence, and I would never condone that. I think we need to do something about that. But a lot of the studies on the statistic that like the trans women sexual assault statistic, I know a lot of the studies on that come from a sample that included a high percentage of sex workers. So it's it's skewed in Latin countries as well, and so just the pool that figure was drawn from was a much higher rate of sex workers than the general population. So it wasn't necessarily representative of trans women, a group as a whole.
Well,
so I'm just a little. I haven't read any evidence that shows it's more likely they will be assaulted than.
So
I don't know how you could even measure like how many. And I'm not just counting trans-identified males. I'm talking any male that is going to take advantage of self-ID laws to get into a women's space. I don't know that we have any studies comparing those two things.
Sure. So one. Well, I have a couple things. One, here's transgender people over 4 times more likely than cisgender people to be victims of violent crime. Obviously, violent crime doesn't necessarily mean sexual assault, but, transgender people have higher rates of violent victimization than cisgender women and men. And, yeah, this can also mean harassment, so that's not necessarily the same.
Yeah, and but
15% of the population, that's a staggering number. And I guess what I would say is, I feel like you're putting the onus on transgender people, but this is kind of always, transgender people have always been able to use the bathroom of their choice. They just sort of walk in and no one gives them a hard time, because a significant part of the time they're passing. No one's stopping them because they don't know their sex.
Out of all the situations of women's single-sex spaces, like in my opinion, the bathroom is the most mild and like least problematic. But the thing is that yes, if people are passing, then you're not going to know, right? But I don't think that a girl who has just started her period and is embarrassed and is going through a really vulnerable time, like I don't think she should have to share the bathroom with biological males.
But I don't think they should have to.
And it's just such a slippery slope, because there's trans people who pass, right?
Yeah.
But then if you're defining it in terms of passing, like you said, that's problematic, and so it comes down to self-ID, and then you can just get whoever calls themselves a woman is a woman, and that's how we end up with situations like the one in prison.
Sure, but I think
happening in bathrooms.
I think what you're looking for is a perfect solution, and I don't necessarily have one. And I would just say this seems to be the best by chance. This seems to be what I'm ascribing seems to be easily the best. Well,
as a woman, I'm telling you, it is not the best.
Well, then what's better for you?
It's always fine for the trans community to say, what's best for them and what they want. But when women push back and they say, you know what, no, this violates our rights.
Can you give
I look like the bad guy just for standing up for women and not wanting male rapists in prison cells with non-violent female criminals. Not wanting sports teams where people with physiological advantages from being biological male are destroying the other women and are destroying the women and dominating women's sports. Like I don't think it's okay, and this is an assault on women's rights, and all I am doing is simply standing up to that and saying this isn't the right solution. This isn't okay. It's not fair to women.
Sure.
So
I'm
not attacking anyone by putting my foot down and saying this is not acceptable.
What I would say is a lot of the problems that I kind of have with your rhetoric is I agree that
my
you don't.
Rhetoric.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Because none of the facts and figures that I've shared with you are valid.
It's just rhetoric. Okay. Well, I'm gonna talk about the specifically things that I about your rhetoric that I have issues with, and it doesn't feel
maybe you could start by not calling it rhetoric.
What would you like me
rather
to use?
Well-reasoned arguments based on facts.
Okay. The issue that I have with your arguments is, I think that they don't necessarily have any prescriptions involved. And sometimes when you give all of these issues that you're seeing in society, sometimes people come to their own conclusions. They're like, okay, well, we need to do something about this. And Cat here isn't giving us any solutions. So we're going to come up with our own. And those solutions can sometimes entail fucking monitoring kids' genitals, or
I never advocated for
I know
that.
you didn't.
And
I know you didn't. That's my point.
I think that your order of operations is a little bit messed up, because women were never asked if it was okay to accept males into our spaces.
You're right. They were never asked, but they did it anyway. We were never
asked if we wanted to be called birthing people. We were never asked if we wanted men on our sports team. That was just things that were put into place, without ever asking our opinion. And now we're fighting back against that. Now we're standing up. And so, it's not my responsibility to come up with all the solutions for the trans community. But I do have great empathy for the trans community, and it's something that I've been through, and it has nothing to do with, me having negative feelings towards them. But I do have negative feelings towards, the women who are getting raped in prison, and the people missing out on scholarships, opportunities, missing out on being treated fairly in sports.
Mm-hmm.
I do feel negativity towards that, but not towards the people. And I did actually suggest, having separate sports teams, having separate bathrooms. Like those are just some solutions.
But how is that enforced?
In my head, but why is the trans community? Why are they so fixated on taking away women's spaces rather than looking for different solutions that don't harm anybody?
Here's the thing. I keep looking and I'm not seeing a better solution. And if your point is, hey, this solution that you have isn't perfect, and people like me, people like you are damaged. People like Cat, sorry, I want to be clear with who I'm referring to. People like Cat are damaged in this sort of solution. I would never take that away from you. And I think that is a terrible situation that you had. I don't know exactly when you transitioned, whether or not that was as a child or as an adult, but that is a real thing that I want to be sympathetic to, is the fact that these solutions don't work for everyone. But I just don't have any other solution that seems to benefit everyone it involved. And sometimes it feels like it's cis versus trans, and we have to exclude the trans to include the cis. And I'm just saying, well, let's try to find some sort of balance. And you're like, well, this doesn't work for everyone. And I'm like, I know, but what else can we do here? I would never say that there's not a problem with sexual assault, but there's...
What we need to do is more research rather than just leaping into these invasive and experimental treatments that are not based on evidence. We've never had clinical trials for hormones.
Quick pause here. Just wanted to talk about a couple studies that were about hormone therapy, transgender and transition. We've got this one about hormone secretion in transgender males. And then we've also got this one of effects of gender-reforming hormone therapy among transgender women.
For gender dysphoria, for puberty blockers, for certain surgical procedures, there's doctors literally just inventing new surgical procedures and starting to perform them, without them ever being critically examined at all. And I just think that every other field of medicine, every other political policy, it's well, I won't say every other political policy, but there needs to be evidence behind all of these changes that we're making, and and there just isn't the evidence that is available. I recently posted a review on my TikTok of all the studies, and most of them they have all but two of the studies in this meta-analysis had either moderate or high risk of bias, and a lot of these studies the dropout rate is over 50%.
Sure,
so we don't know what's happening. We don't know what's happening to half the people that we're putting through these treatments, and so I just don't think that what trans activists are asking for. Oh, I'm sorry, that was my cat.
You're good.
But I don't think what the trans activists are asking for is based on evidence. I think that other people get caught in the crossfire, and that the activists continually don't address people's very real concerns about all of this, and that is creating a divide between trans people and non-trans people. I think that the concept of cisgender is problematic because I don't identify as a woman. I am a woman because I'm biologically female.
Right,
but yeah, it is causing people to turn against the community, and it's causing controversy because they're not taking into account the concerns of like women and families of young children, and everybody's just being written off as bigoted or transphobic for questioning the narrative at all.
Look, I understand your frustration for sure. What I would say is I hope we can understand it from their perspective too, where it seems like you bring across all of these sort of solutions, and trans people are saying, okay, but yeah, if we go through with what you're advocating for, which is basically to stall out on these hormone blockers, the rate of suicidality, the rate of depression is skyrocketing in people who can't get their treatments while we're waiting for this. And I'm never going to be against finding new avenues to treat gender dysphoria. And honestly, I'd probably side with you and say, hey, if I had a kid who if there was a child of mine who was saying, hey, I don't feel like I'm in the right body, I would absolutely affirm their gender. I'd put them on therapy, but I'd say, hey, probably surgery isn't a great thing to think of until I feel like you can consent to that for yourself. If they don't have gender dysphoria, if they're just like, oh, I kind of like the idea of being a woman, I don't want to kill myself though, I would say, okay, well, let's think about this. Let's brew on this for a little bit and sort of wait until you can consent to it. But it can feel like a dire emergency when so many people are taking their lives. And I think that aspect of it just gets ignored so quickly.
Well, I'm not ignoring it. It's just, kids with mental health issues have been around for a long time. And I think the way they manifest from generation to generation, like there tend to be trends with how mental illness manifests, right? Like when I was a kid, it was way more about anorexia and self-harm were the two big things. And, kids were suicidal back then as well. And, mental illness in kids it's not like it's something new. And it's just the number of kids presenting with gender dysphoria has blown up by, I don't remember exactly how many. It's like the last 5 years or something like that. I have to find it, but it's increased by about 4,000%.
Of course, because we're accepting it.
We saw a similar spike in anorexia and self-harm and other psychological conditions in the past. We've seen trends in different manifestations of mental illness.
What you would call a trend is what I would call accepting, because I'm gonna look at something like back in like the 1920s or something. My grandma, this is a little personal for me. Well, not too, I'm just going to use a personal example. Okay. My grandma was born left-handed, and she was told, hey, you have to use your right hand. That's not accepted in this classroom. And then, when she became she turned about like 20 or 25, it suddenly became normal. It said, you know what? We're going to allow people to start being able to write with their left hand. We're not going to force kids to do anything. And you saw a huge spike of people who are like, oh, I'm left-handed. This is sick. Now I don't feel like I have to be one of these righties, these right-handed people. I can now write how I would like to write. And, that sort of acceptance will always see a spike, but then it levels out because we saw it spike from like 1% to 5%, and then it stagnated because about 5% of people are left-handed. And I think that we're seeing this spike of transgender people and we're going, whoa, this is a trend, when really people are just normalized about it. And now the people who are transgender become transgender, and then it stays at about 5%, which is part of the population. That's just like what happens when we normalize groups, is you'll see this spike.
Right. I've heard that argument before, that it has to do with acceptance. And I guess yes, that could have partially to do with it, just that it's more visible and more widely accepted. However, when you look at the actual numbers and how it's manifesting, right, there's, I don't know if you've heard of the concept of rapid onset gender dysphoria, but
No.
there are not only more individuals presenting with gender dysphoria, but entire social groups at schools will come out as trans, and it's especially overrepresented in adolescent females. And so you would think
Sure.
that if it's just based on greater acceptance and greater visibility, then there would be, a 50-50 increase in the number of boys and the number of girls.
Not
But
necessarily.
instead what we're seeing is a large increase in adolescent girls. And
let's say left-handedness was more so like biologically more determined with the XY chromosome. That doesn't mean that you won't see a similar spike when it becomes accepted. I don't see how that would be relevant if it's more accepted in one group than another. That doesn't mean that it has to. I don't know. I don't understand that. I don't follow that logic.
Well, all of the research that we have done on transgender people, like in the past, like it used to be considered a common thing. Since transgenderism has been studied, that it was more common in boys, and so the trend used to be that it was largely male, and now it has inverted, and so a lot of the studies that were done on it were done on boys, and
sure, but
and now the demographic has totally switched. So
because the sample size is increased.
I see where you're coming from, but also, I don't think that we can. I think that the flip in the biological sex most afflicted, like it should at least trigger like more research into what this is happening, rather than all throughout medicine, most of the drug tests or most of the tests have been run on men and just extrapolated to women without actually examining that. And It seems like a similar thing is happening with gender dysphoria. A lot of the research that was applied to males is now applied to older males too. Adult males is now being, the same approaches to treat gender dysphoria are now being extrapolated to young females.
Sure. Sorry. Are you saying that the studies you're saying that the studies are biased because they have more men in it than women?
I think that's one of the problems.
But oftentimes,
I think that, but no, I mean the studies are biased because a lot of them have a 20% loss to follow-up rate is considered at high risk for bias. That's kind of like the threshold.
Okay.
And a lot of these studies have, upwards of 50-60% of loss to follow-up.
Sure. What I would say is,
so these are people that we don't know what happened to. If they have detransitioning can be extremely traumatic, and I think that the suicide rate of detransitioners needs to be looked into. And then other problems that you have is that the groups that they're comparing are not comparable groups. So like recently there was a large study, I have to look up the author names, but it had over 27,000 participants, and it looks like it was going to be this, from the conclusion that the authors drew, like it looks like it's this great evidence for the efficacy of trans surgery, but then, an expert wrote an analysis of it and pointed out that the groups compared, so the group that had surgery were also older, they were wealthier, there were a lot of factors that, these people just had greater life satisfaction in general than the group that hadn't had surgery, were younger, they were poorer, had greater mental illness to begin with, and things like that. So they compare unequivalent groups.
Sure.
They're all uncontrolled studies. They all have high loss to follow-up. So yeah, like the body of research, nothing that I have seen has provided strong evidence that these treatments are useful and that our current approach is like effective. And the discrepancy in males versus females, like that is another factor. Like if most of the research has been done on boys and men, and then now we have this huge group of like adolescent girls, I do think that that may indicate that the research doesn't apply to this new group.
Sure. So I'm obviously not a clinician. I'm not a research assistant, so I wouldn't be able to verify, or like when I read studies, I just read the abstract and the conclusions. Like I do not feel comfortable eyeing, the
Well,
the bulk of the data.
I don't either. I mean,
No,
I
for
have had to
sure.
read several studies for my major, but that's why these are reviews that have been done by other experts.
Sure. Well, then the
That
meta-analysis should
challenge
show that,
that have
right? It should
conclusions
say,
that
hey,
challenge
this.
the conclusion of these other researchers. And there's many other medical professionals and experts in the field that have critiqued the available body of research and recommended that we should not be making treatment recommendations based on this low quality evidence.
Sure. So a couple things. One, I would never say that we shouldn't be doing more research. I would say we should be funding these studies. We should look more into this. And anyone who's advocating against that, that's a problem. We want more information, of course.
Trans activists are advocating.
Well, I don't support every trans activist. I'm not gonna stand by some moron who's saying we shouldn't have studies done based off how effective treatment is. That's ludicrous. So, sure.
Recently, there was a study on detransitioners. I think it was in the UK that the funding was pulled and it was canceled because it was politically incorrect.
Well, what was it? Because politically incorrect could mean a lot of things. Like, if it.
I could send you the article. Like I said, I pulled up a lot of resources for this.
Sure.
But if you Google UK study detransitioners,
could you repeat that? Sorry.
UK study detransitioners shut down. If you Google something like that, I think it's an article in the Guardian about it.
UK study detransitioners. Shut down.
Shut down. Yeah.
University turned down politically incorrect transgender research.
But I did want to share with you, before we wrap up, another thing you had talked about in your video was that the detransition rate is only 3%, and that most detransitioners detransition because of social pressures. So I wanted to just sort of provide some contrary evidence to those claims.
Okay.
So the detransition rate from that study by Jack Turbin, who, by the way, has been called out for accepting donations from one of the companies that makes puberty blockers. What is the name for them?
Sure,
the Arbor Corporation. So he's a researcher who's accepting donations from pharmaceutical companies.
Sure, but was his research shoddy?
Well, the way he selected his sample was to survey a population of people who still identify as transgender. And so, yes, of those, the people who said they detransition at one point said, it was more likely to be due to social pressure. However, there have been 2 more studies that surveyed detransitioners specifically, like people who identify as detransitioned.
Well,
and so those 2 studies, they surveyed detransitioners, and the majority of them no longer identify as trans.
Sure.
A lot of them say that the majority said they did not receive, they weren't fully informed about the effects, or that they weren't evaluated by a medical professional. So the reason when you look at detransitioners versus those who still identify as trans, most detransitioners no longer identify as trans. So the way that Jack Turbin designed that study, which is supposed to be on detransitioning, but he actually effectively left out the majority of detransitioners.
Sure.
So
obviously, I don't have this on hand. What I would say is the second and third study is also heavily biased because you're not looking at the transgender people who chose not to detransition, and that's what my claim was, which was that it was 33%.
But
what you would need is some study to look at people who have undergone surgery or people who have puberty blockers. How many people are still trans today? Which that number I don't know. I would assume
yes, I don't know either, but when you look at the number of detransitioners, I mean, for one thing, when you look at the number of detransitioners, the reason they gave for detransitioning was not about social pressures for the most part. It's a very small fraction of them express social pressure or wanting to retransition. And there's been 2 surveys of detransitioners now. One was by Ellie Vandenbush, and the other is by Lisa Littman, and those came out in, I believe, 2021.
Sure.
So when you look at what detransitioners are saying as far as their reasons for detransitioning versus those who still identify as trans and then either, retransitioned or whatever, it's a very different narrative.
Okay. But I wouldn't have the numbers and you don't either. right? We don't know what those numbers are because it sounds like the studies that you were citing were biased in the other direction. So we would probably just need to do that thing that I was saying. And I would be very curious about those numbers, and I might want to take back my claim that it's 3%, because if what you're saying is accurate and we come up with a new study and it turns out it's like 10, then yeah, I would change my mind for sure. Or I'd at least change the numbers. But
there have been studies on trans kids in the past. I don't know if you've heard of the studies on desistance, but there is the body of research is not perfect. You know, the sample sizes could be larger, but there have been about 10 to 15 studies on the phenomenon of desistance, which is kids that identify as trans or suffer from gender dysphoria as a kid or as a teenager. Anywhere between 60 to 90% of them desist from their transgender identity by the time they reach adulthood. So those are all studies that came out before the current.
Wait, did you say six? I might have misheard you. Did you say 60 to 90% of desisters desisted from the trans? Isn't that the definition of desisting? Could you repeat what you said? What was that 60 to 90% number?
Yeah, 60 to 90% are basically no longer identify as trans, no longer suffer from gender dysphoria.
Isn't that what a desister is? Wouldn't that just be 100%?
Desister means that they desist from their transgender identity. Right. They no longer have the transgender identity.
So you're saying you're saying 60 to 90% of the people who identify themselves as desisters no longer.
Okay, so kids who had gender dysphoria as children, right? Mm-hmm. 60 to 90% of those, depending on the study, no longer have dysphoria or identify as trans by the time they reach adulthood, and a lot of them instead
without transitioning.
Without transitioning, right?
Okay.
When the watchful waiting approach is employed, they will outgrow their gender dysphoria and instead grow into.
But that's 60 to 90%. That's
a gay identity as an adult.
Wait, but you're looking at the people who haven't transitioned. You're not looking at the people who have. Like, that's 60 to 90%.
Well, that's a good point. So these studies were done before the puberty blockers approach was so universal, right?
No, I'm lost because
like up until that point, our approach was called watchful waiting. When kids presented with gender dysphoria, the approach was just basically to see, let's just watch and wait, not affirm, not discourage, just kind of
correct and
wait it out.
Suicide rates were through the roof.
Well, I mean, all of these kids survived.
All of those kids survived because you're wait. Of course, those kids survived. You're doing studies about them. You don't do studies on corpses. That's
no.
There's a huge selection bias here. There's a huge selection bias when it comes to this. Sorry, go ahead.
Other trans research, over 50% of them do not follow up. So other trans research, yes, it has high loss to follow up rates. In that case, yeah, a lot of them probably have committed suicides, the ones that didn't follow up.
For sure.
But no, these kids that made it through these studies, they desisted from their transgender identity. And so this idea of like the suicide, I believe that they can say that they feel suicidal, and I'm not discounting that, but there haven't been any studies on the actual rates, in kids. So I don't know that self-reporting necessarily reflects reality.
But sure, I would say that self-reporting data, I don't know how else we can get that information. I don't know how else other than saying, hey, of the people who are transgender, how many people who have attempted to kill themselves? But I would say your idea of 60 to 90% who have, had gender dysphoria and
no longer have it as adults.
Yeah, there's a huge selection bias there too, because if the gender dysphoria is so strong, they transition. And those people aren't included in the study.
These studies, you're not hearing me when I say that these studies were done before. They're older studies that were done before the puberty blockers approach was universally the preferred approach, right? Like, these are studies done on kids before that was a thing.
Wouldn't you say that the puberty blockers are a softer and more gradual way to transition genders, and that if they feel more comfortable that they can... Okay.
Wait, I think you're confused. Like, none of these people transitioned.
Yeah,
they outgrew their gender dysphoria.
So what I would say is I would never discount the fact that there is a percentage of people who go through gender dysphoria and then end up growing up, and then they're like, oh, actually, you know what? I just felt awkward during puberty, and
right,
my body's crazy,
majority.
and that's not a majority though. I don't. Could I see that study? Could you send me that?
It's multiple studies. Yes, I will.
And
there's an article by James Cantor that lists about 10 studies on.
I don't really go over this in the conversation, but essentially what she was pulling up is legitimately just just a blog post of just all of the numbers done by studies and then adding them all together, making no discrepancy between each of those studies, just adding them all together under the same denominator, and then creating these percentages. Research was done about this specific situation, about that blog post, and they came to the conclusions that it does not support the stereotype that most children who are actually gender dysphoric will desist in their gender identities before adolescence. There is also the big things that they did not actually differentiate between were children with consistent, persistent, and insistent gender dysphoria, kids who socially transition, and kids who just acted more masculine or feminine than their birth sex and culture allowed for. You can see they just sort of added up all of the numbers and then combined them into one number, and that is is a very serious methodological flaw.
There's an article by James Cantor.
Mm-hmm.
It's in. I think his journal is called Sexology Now or something like that. But he has an article listing
Sexology Today.
Sexology Today. Okay, and then he's got an article listing all the studies on desistance, and some of them are older studies before we had the current terminology. Like, we didn't use the term gender dysphoria, so they're less valuable. But the newer ones are actually on kids who suffered from clinical gender dysphoria and desisted from their transgender identity. So anyway, it's about 10 or 15 studies cited in that article that you can check out. And it's not an ideal body of research, but then when you just think about it and you go, how did we go from, these numbers that say that 60 to 90% of kids will outgrow that dysphoria versus putting them all on puberty blockers? Like, how did we make that leap? Because it wasn't based on evidence. It wasn't based on, it wasn't based on new evidence at all. And so, and it's just, when you're putting kids on puberty blockers, you're making them dependent on exogenous hormones for the rest of their lives. And, the puberty blockers to hormones pipeline essentially makes them a medical patient for the rest of their life. So this is a high level of profit for the pharmaceutical companies.
Sure.
This is not evidence-based.
But you could make that argument for any single medical condition. Like, I have a brother with OCD, and he has to take a pill for the rest of his life to just make sure that he's a functioning human being. And that's just, you can say that for sure there is definitely an incentive there to sell this person that pill, and maybe he should just go to therapy and figure out his mood swings. But then you sort of like recognize, well, this pill is absolutely helping him in ways that therapy is unfortunately unable to, and maybe that's just what we should focus on, and that's important.
But with your brother's OCD,
Mm-hmm.
and that type of drug, there are clinical trials. And there's a body of evidence, at least, for most pharmaceutical drugs. They have sometimes animal testing, then they'll move to clinical trials
Mm-hmm.
In humans. And I've studied biochemistry. Like, this is something we talked about a lot. And then even after it's FDA approved, a lot of times drugs can get removed from the market.
Yeah.
If there's too many side effects, and that is happening. So none of that is happening with this puberty blocker.
Didn't you just say that what is the drug that you said, Lupron? Isn't that being pulled from the markets?
No.
It's not getting pulled from the markets.
Despite the lawsuit and everything, they changed their company name, but it's still being prescribed to children. It's being prescribed off-label to treat gender dysphoria, despite the fact that there have been no even though that, maybe there have been clinical trials for like endometriosis for these drugs, or like prostate cancer, like to treat a new condition. Like, you still need to have clinical trials for that condition, which has not happened.
So, look, all I'll say is, I think this is kind of the frustrating bit of just being thrown articles. And I don't think this is a fault on your side. I think that sometimes it's just important for like, let's go over this first, because I just did a quick Google search of like Lupron deaths pulled from market, and the first link is a link from NBCnews.com saying a viral fake news story linked trans healthcare to thousands of deaths.
Well, no, it's not trans healthcare. This is people that took
puberty blockers.
Lupron for other. This is people that took Lupron for
but I don't.
conditions.
What I'm saying is I don't know enough about this situation. I would have to look into this, because I'm not even going to read the article like in person. If we want to have like a part 2 where we like actually sort of trade sources and we can sort of go over it, that's fine. But I don't have enough information about these studies, and they could be linking to anywhere, including sometimes viral fake news stories. And I'm not saying that's what's going on. I'm just saying I don't know, and I don't.
I've talked to people personally that have been affected by Lupron
Okay.
on TikTok and online other places. That like one of them has permanent brain damage from taking Lupron, and there's a site called LupronVictimsHub.com. And I mean,
but that,
there are. I didn't just draw from one source. Like,
no, for sure. But that I can't. Sorry. The more I'm looking into this study, I'm not sure. And I would have to really look into it. But it looks like there's a lot of credible sources saying that this is fake. And I'm not saying it's fake. I'm just saying I don't have any of the information in front of me right now. And I think it'd be unfair for both me and you to just sort of like exchange stories and then read this sort of thing. When the first thing that I pulled up, and I just said Lupron deaths pulled from market looking for some sort of talk, and all of the complaints seem to be generated from the fact that the thousands of death is incorrect. But I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm just saying this is what I'm pulling from Google. So I don't know enough about this situation, what's going on from Lupron. But what I'm saying is, if what you're saying is accurate, I would obviously say, hey, Lupron should not be on the market. We should probably try to find some other sort of mediating factor that doesn't kill people. That's important, especially when it comes to pharmaceutical companies. And I think that I don't know what else to say other than that.
Yeah, I mean, there's that, and then there's just, even if Lupron's completely safe, it's just, I don't believe that children can consent to irreversible body changes.
I don't either. But sometimes
so that's actually the bigger argument for me is, even though I do, I have seen plenty of evidence that these drugs are not safe, and including just my own like education. Like I've taken biochemistry, and I know how interconnected everything is in the body. And, there's just, I mean, there have been studies that have shown things like memory impairments, decrease in height, increase in body fat, decrease in muscle mass, bone mineral density decrease. Like, I mean, these are legitimate like scientific studies, but
for sure,
even if that aside, I mean, kids can't consent to
I don't think that's true.
Sorry,
let me clarify what exactly I mean by that. What I'm saying is I don't think it's necessarily true that consent is the whole picture here if we throw out all of the medical bias. Because if we say, obviously this isn't true, okay, but if we just say, oh, there is a 100% likelihood that you are going to kill yourself if you are trans, and there is a 0% likelihood that this will affect your body, then it would be inappropriate for a parent not to go through that surgery, not to go through those procedures. That is just too important to make sure, regardless of whether or not they consent, because children can't consent to vaccines either, but we still vaccinate children because we know it's best for them, because we know that the side effects far outweigh the risks, and that is too important when it comes to children's care, and that's why we have guardians to make sure that we overtake that. So I don't think that consent is fully on the line here.
It's the idea of, if I don't get this treatment, and if kids don't get this treatment, they will kill themselves. There's no proof for that.
No, but that's what I'm saying. I'm saying you rely on the proof, and it's not just about the consent. That's all I'm saying.
Situation where they need mental health treatment. They need a higher level of care if they're suicidal. Like I don't believe that you could prove that the majority will kill themselves, and that's divorcing it from you can't call something life-saving medicine if it is not literally life-saving. Like these are not literally medically life-saving drugs.
Wait, what do you mean by that?
But, the idea is that, well, they're life-saving because they'll prevent kids from committing suicide, right? Like that's the logic. but the drugs themselves are not life-saving drugs.
Wait, when you say it's not life saving,
to induce body modification.
Sure, but like, would you consider any sort of like psychotropic medicine to be life saving because it can decrease the like? Would you consider antidepressants to be life saving?
Not literally. No.
I feel like
I would prefer to use language like, that this effectively treats depression and suicidal ideation, but
the risk is that they die.
It's not they're not medically. Well, they die from suicide.
For sure.
That's different than like I would consider a life-saving drug to be like insulin or something.
Okay.
That if it's medically necessary, where you will die if you do not take that drug, then that is life-saving. That is medically necessary.
Okay.
But I don't consider that. I don't consider that when taking the drug will not literally save your life. I think that's a misnomer, and it's part of propaganda.
But I like if we're just disagreeing like on a semantic level, like sure, but I think that the risks involved when it comes to suicide ideation should not be ignored. Like that is so important to consider. And this I like when it comes to any sort of like psychological medication, like that's the first thing that you should consider is, can this person's life be at risk for themselves? Well, sure, but like
I would consider like an antidepressant that has gone through clinical trials and that we know is effective at treating depression in most people. I would consider that closer to a life-saving drug than something that is experimental and has not been proven.
Right, but my contention with you, my contention with you calling it a life-saving drug was that it does. Or sorry, my contention with you, all I was saying was this life-saving drug, and it seems like you were contending that, and it absolutely is. It helps people not kill themselves.
Well, no, we don't have any proof of that. Like,
okay.
We keep saying that over and over again, but we have no proof that this actually helps. Like this study, which is a recent study on puberty blockers from the UK, it's one of the first studies of its kind, and they had 44 participants, 43 of which went from puberty blockers to cross-sex hormones, and it showed no improvement in psychological function and a decrease in bone density. It showed no improvement. So they did qualitative interviews, right? And they asked the participants to say like, was your experience positive or negative? And a lot of them said their experience was positive, but then on psychological tests, like where they rank like feelings of depression, suicidal thoughts, gender dysphoria, etc., they did not improve throughout the time they were being treated.
Sure. What I have seen a significant portion of surveys done for trans people.
But that's surveys. Like that's.
But yours is surveys too, because they're just asking you're just asking their mental health. You're just asking the child's mental health if it's significantly improved. That's essentially a survey as well. It's the survey packaged within the study tracking the process of a drug. But you're still just asking the kid, and you know this if you go to like a therapist or whatever, you really just fill out a survey based on how you do, and they track that sort of information to determine if these drugs are benefiting you or not. And that can be subject to a whole bunch of different biases, which is why it's important to get a whole bunch of large numbers to make sure that we can sort of account for that sort of thing.
But we don't have a whole bunch of large numbers.
And I would say that we should get them for sure.
So I mean, how can you say that it helps when we don't have anything?
Everything.
I'm fully willing to admit that like this study with a sample size of 44 is not like we need more than that. And like most of the studies on puberty blockers are small. But I mean, if we haven't had clinical trials, we haven't had large sample sizes, like how can you say that that it helps when we literally do not have that information?
I would say that the breadth of the knowledge that I can see, which is significant, there is a significant amount of surveys that track trans people's mental health before and after transition are overwhelmingly positive towards that transition. Now, obviously, there are certain caveats. There are people who slip through the cracks, and that sucks. That's unfortunate. People like you.
Over half of them.
I would have to look into that. I would, and that's what it comes down to is like if you are saying that, gender dysphoria legitimately does for well, I don't know what you said, like 70% of people, it like transition doesn't help, then yeah, I might come off this idea that like kids should transition, but I need to look into that because I feel like a lot of these, I would have to check your sources because every time I look it up, it's either hard to find or there are, I would have to look them in. I'm not gonna say whether or not it's accurate or not.
It's hard to find for a reason because when you try to search for this stuff, a lot of trans organizations, that's what will come up first, and they will present the figures in such a way that supports their point. Like,
see, this feels almost so like conspiratorial that like Google and all of these different search engines, like I can use any search engine that you'd like. They're all sort of in bed with these like trans activists, and they're all sort of deviously behind the covers, like trying to push all of their favorite studies. And it's so hard to find, not because it's discredited and they use like, factors that determine the validity of studies, but instead it's because there's a Google representative combing through all of the data and saying, no, knock this one because this isn't what we like. I don't feel like that's how Google works. I would have to look more into these studies, and because it's sort of come down to that, I'd love to have a more like moral philosophical conversation about gender, but I can't grapple with these studies that you're throwing at me because I would need to look into them more. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. All I would ask is just that, when you make a claim like we have proof that it helps. I mean, this is why I keep bringing up the research, right? Because like when you say we have proof that it helps, we really don't. We really don't have robust methodology and controlled studies.
But I was looking
at other fields of medicine, like we do in other fields of medicine. Like it's not the same quality of research. That's why I keep bringing it up.
But here's what I would say. I would say, it needs to be dynamic. And I looked through a significant amount of studies or surveys of trans people, and it looked like it benefited a significant portion of people. However, if what you're saying is true, then yeah, maybe I should take down the video. Maybe what I'm saying isn't inaccurate. But I would have to look through that. I would have to comb through those studies and say, oh, maybe this little snippet, maybe that's not accurate, and maybe I need to revise what exactly I said there. But I don't think I did anything wrong by looking at surveys and saying, oh, it looks like the breadth of the scientific information is pulled towards here. Now, if you have a competing survey, then it's like, okay, yeah, I'll change my opinion. But I don't have that in front of me. And I think that it's okay to share this sort of information as long as you remain dynamic and you say, oh, okay, I'll accept this information. I'll take down the previous videos. I'll issue a correction. But I don't have any of that in front of me. And I would really have to look through these sources to determine why on earth it looks like only on one person's website it's saying 60 to 90% of people just detransition, and nowhere else in sort of like all of these studies can I find anything like that. I would have to look into that. And I think that that's a fair ask.
It's not only one. I mean, like he lists 10 studies, in the one article. That's why I gave the article is because it's a compilation of the studies, and he's a sex researcher, top sex researcher in Canada for over I think 30 years or something like that. So it's not like it's just a random person's website. But
I will say,
I see what you're saying, and I just, I would caution you against using the 3% detransition rate because new research has come out since then. The Littman and Vanderboos studies I cited that do show the demographic of detransitioners and why they detransitioned. And also I would keep in mind that Jack Turbin is receiving donations from the puberty blocker manufacturer.
I want to cut you off just real quick. I do want to bring this up, and mostly the irony of what we were talking about beforehand. Some very quick things into James Cantor. It looks like he's a pedophilia apologist too, and I was saying, like, I think it's funny that you were like, oh, all of the people who, if they're apologists for pedophilia, we should ignore them, except for this one person who seems to approve the things that I'm saying.
I'm not endorsing him or all the things that he believes.
I'm not asking you to, but when you were,
it's solely for the list.
Sure, but that was sort of my point, that like I think we can distance ourselves from this, we can just look at, hey, is their research shoddy? Is their information shoddy? But it seems like you were ignoring only the first half of it and not the second half of it.
Listing a bunch of studies that weren't even performed by him is different than accepting a theory that completely overrides our understanding of gender for the last, how many thousands of years.
But I don't, if all of his points were correct, can't we just ignore the other aspect of him?
Well, I don't agree that John Money's points were correct. I don't believe.
But then let's contest with that. Let's contest with that and not bring up the pedophilia, right?
I think it's a metaphysical belief.
Sure, but let's contest with that then, and not sort of slander people's characters and slander people's beliefs based off the character who did that, because I could do the same thing with James Cantor and just sort of ignore everything you're doing.
All I'm saying is that yes, John Money's thing is based on beliefs. This one article, and honestly, I have cited this article in a video. At that time I was not aware of, I don't remember exactly. It was a comment on some forum that James Cantor made. I was not aware of that, but I think that just simply a list of all of the desistance studies, I don't consider that a belief in the same way that I consider gender identity a belief. I consider it a resource of studies.
But I would probably agree with.
I agree. It's not ideal. It's not ideal, and I don't endorse James Cantor
for sure. But I wouldn't endorse James Money just because I'm saying, oh hey, I believe I believe that the way that we interact with gender is how he described it, and I think that that's okay to say, and not just but he's he said that there are ethical pedophiles.
He also experimented on children, did unethical experiments.
But I would obviously not be okay with that, right? Just like you wouldn't be okay with James Cantor, it feels like it feels like you're fully saying it's okay for people to be pedophiles as long as they agree with me. That's how it sounds sometimes. Does that make sense? I don't understand this huge discrepancy between these two different individuals. One, you said we need to discredit all of his ideas.
I feel like you're trying to distract from the fact that it's literally just a list of studies. I've not said that
I was just pointing out the irony. I was just
simply a list of studies.
For sure. And I would like to look into it. And I'm not going to, I would say that if he is correct, regardless of his personal positions, my video was incorrect.
Zucker is another one that you can, a lot of people who study sexology, it seems like some of them tend to have some fucked up ideas too, unfortunately. But Kenneth Zucker has written about the desistance studies as well. So that's another reason. Honestly, I've not dig enough dirt on every single one of these.
No, for sure. And I wouldn't expect you to.
John Money is literally the father of gender identity.
I've never even heard his name, and I ascribe to his ideas, though. I can distance myself from those people and just say.
Why? But why do you ascribe to those ideas?
Yeah, and we can get into that.
Why do you think it's credible?
Well, why? I feel like. Why do you feel like it's not credible that this is how we interact with people in society, is through these sort of stereotypes that we put on other people? And that... Well,
it's we have biological sex.
Yeah.
And then we have the constructs that society has made up about biological sex, which we're calling gender.
Sure.
But similarly, we have race, right? Race is based on a person's ethnic background and the color of their skin, which is skin color is a physical characteristic, and then what we make up about that, namely racial stereotypes, that is a social construct, right? But gender identity, which is the theory come up with by John Money, that is the idea that people are born with this innate gender identity, where they identify with this social construct essentially. And that, someone born male can identify as a woman, and someone born female can identify as a male, and that's what makes them a man is this identification. And I don't agree with that. I think it's exactly like saying, that, if I'm white, but I've always wanted to be a rapper, and I don't know, I like fried chicken or something, then I can identify as black. That's horribly offensive, right?
Sure.
So that's why I think that the concept of gender identity is is bogus. Like I don't think it's anything innate. It's
But
not something that could be tested by science. Like it's literally it's impossible to test.
Sure, but
gender identity.
I think that when you use that example of like a white rapper who likes fried chicken, therefore aren't they black? Just because it's stereotypes of a race. I would say that there are social constructions when it comes to race, absolutely, but one that white person who just likes rapping and whatever can never ascribe to. Like, for example, the way that they are treated by police or by society in general being considered like not an okay person, or, you know, the very real economic downturns. The very
male cannot understand the very real threat of being raped and having that rape result in pregnancy.
Wait,
biological male can never understand that.
Hold on, because I want to pause you right here.
Okay.
There are plenty of biological women who have not been pregnant, and that is not a core idea of what it means to be a female.
But there is the threat.
Just as
a black person has a greater threat from police. Right, that white people can't understand.
What if I have a question?
They won't understand living through that. A woman can? She has the threat of if she is raped.
Not all women.
Yes,
because
all women.
Infertile women have the threat of being.
All women have the threat of rape. And
pregnancy. There are some females, some women who cannot be pregnant.
Okay, they cannot be pregnant, but
sure.
the greater threat of sexual assault,
which trans women can
by default,
trans women can be victims of.
And then there's the stereotypes and, you know, the objectification by default that, but trans women, that's the thing. It would be like me choosing to identify as black and
not because you can't
present as black. Well, if I could, if I was able to actually appear as a black person. Right?
No, I would still disagree because I think that there is a core foundation of what it means to be black in America that you could never reproduce. Namely, looking back at your...
Well, you can't reproduce womanhood either.
Yes.
You can't reproduce womanhood either.
Let me just finish my point real quick. Let me just finish my point right here. You can never look back at your generations and see it completely obliterated due to slave owners. You would never be able to reproduce that. And you would never be able to...
What about the history of women's oppression? What about the history of women's oppression? What about women not being able to vote? You know, women being an object owned by their husbands. Female genital mutilation, infanticide of female humans. Like, what about all of that? Like, a man cannot, you know, the women who are murdered for being female, like, they cannot identify out of that oppression. They can't identify out of being a child bride. You know, they can't, you know, like in this country, the sexual objectification that begins at female puberty, like a male could never know what that feels like or identify with that. And so when a man is saying, I am a woman, I am identical to a biological woman, they are disregarding all of that. And it is a similar comparison to me, a white person identifying as black. I don't see any, you know, big logical distinction between being trans age or trans race versus transgender.
Obviously, for one, trans age, age is a very real distinction that we can place between.
Well, if a man can identify as a woman, then why can't?
Because it's so easy. Because it's not subjective. Because whether or not
but neither is gender. But neither is gender.
No. But I would obviously contest with that. I'm saying age is a ridiculous comparison because I would never say that you can just identify as being 20 years old versus 10 years old. There are some very objective realities when it comes to time, and
there's objective realities in terms of sex too. Like, how can you not see that that is
because
objective?
All of the objective realities that come with sex, we never identify in this society. We never say, oh, like the way that you are, like, for example, all of that oppression that you were referring to, okay, when it comes to like not voting, had nothing to do with anyone's chromosomes. They never did any testing. It was
biological females. It was
no. It wasn't biologically driven. It was someone coming in as a woman and saying,
if someone was born a woman, they couldn't vote. I mean, that's just a ridiculous argument, right? Like, I mean, come on. Like, just because you couldn't chromosomes doesn't mean you can't tell biological sex 99.98% of the time.
That's my point. That's my point right there. Is that
people were discriminated against based on their biological sex.
What I'm saying is,
like, if you are denying that, then you are being misogynistic.
What I'm saying is the 99.98% of things that you're referring to when it comes to sex, it's encompassed 100% when it comes to gender. Now, they match each other a consistent amount of times, for sure. I would never deny that. But when you say that 99.98%, what you're saying is, oh, it's this amount of sex. And I'm like, yeah, but it's this amount of gender. And I feel that gap that you're creating.
Okay. But the whole concept of gender identity and people medically transitioning, that didn't exist until long after women fought for the right to vote.
Wait, hold on. It's existed from the beginning of time because no one knew. No one.
Well, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. I think John Money made up the concept of gender identity. People used to cross-dress in the past. Like women, it was usually women would cross-dress as men in order to gain the privileges that men had. And if they were able to pass as men, which is rare, that doesn't prove that they were trans or like had a male gender identity. It simply proves that women were discriminated against in the past, and it was beneficial to them to pass as a man, to cross-dress essentially. But we don't have a proof that, everyone since the dawn of time has had a gender identity. Like I'm living proof I don't have a gender identity. I think the vast majority of people would say they don't have a gender identity.
Quick pause here. Just wanted to talk about a couple studies that were about hormone therapy, transgender and transition. We've got this one about hormone secretion in transgender males. And then we've also got this one of effects of gender reforming hormone therapy among transgender women.
Oh yeah, no worries.
Yeah, sorry. You were in the middle of something. I was scrambling to turn audio and video back on, so I might have lost where exactly you were. If you want to restart, I'm so sorry about that.
Oh yeah, for sure. So I think we were disagreeing on in the past the concept of sex-based oppression versus gender-based oppression, and so I was arguing that in the past, the concept of gender identity, that I think it was the 50s or 60s when John Money first proposed that concept, which it's a theory, but in the past, babies were born and they were classified as male or female. Very occasionally you'll have someone who's visibly intersex, but that's a different conversation. We're talking about males versus females here, and that is 99.98% of cases. The doctor can tell if the baby's female or male. So so all of the oppression that happened in the past, like women not being able to vote, women being the property of their husband, et cetera, that was based on biological sex.
But when someone comes in, I guess my point is, when someone comes in to a voting booth and they're like, oh, only men are allowed here, aren't they just looking at the telltale signs of what it means to be a woman, like the stereotypes, as we can call them, like what their hair looked like, what their face looked like, what their clothing was? That's how they.
Are you really arguing that we can't tell the difference between males and females?
Yeah,
without makeup and dresses and fashion choices?
Not without, but so what I would say is there's let's say there's 20 to 30 different components of what it means to be, what we put in the man component and what we put in the woman component. There's one box and a second box, okay? And in the woman, we would say there's very obviously social components. Wearing dresses, long hair, whatever. We fully agree, no armpit hair or whatever. We would fully agree these are socially enforced. There's some biological aspects too. I always go voices, right? What your voice sounds like.
Yeah.
Okay.
And back then, sorry, go ahead.
You're good. So what I'm saying is what people automatically do is they would look through that category and they're like, okay, are 15 of these fulfilled? Great, then they're a woman. And none of them are required, but all of them are sufficient, if that makes sense.
I don't agree. I don't agree.
Have you really never looked at another person and went, I don't know what sex you are? I have zero clue. I don't know how you were born. There's just a big. You try to put them in these boxes and you go question mark.
Most of the people. Occasionally, yes, there is someone who appears androgynous, but for the vast majority of cases, you can tell who's male and who's female.
Yeah,
furthermore, back then, I mean, now a lot of the people who you can't tell or who it's harder to tell, it's because they're on hormones or have had surgeries. And, you know, looking back in the past, like, we didn't have medical intervention until, you know, like 50 years ago or something, you know. And so when you're talking about, like, women fighting for the right to vote, like, they were fighting for biological females. Like, I don't think that a man, I don't think that a trans-identified male is going to put on a dress and makeup and go to the voting booth and get denied because they were presenting as female. Like, women did not have the choice.
But wait, hold on, because this, people can dress up however they want, and sometimes they absolutely get confused with gender. Like, I can throw up a whole bunch of examples where this is a cis man looking like, just sort of dressing like a woman, and if they went into a voting booth in the 50s, they'd get turned away, because I look at them and I go, that's a woman. That's someone who was almost assuredly born with a vagina. And that's like, I would fully agree that it's like a smaller percentage of the population for sure. But I guess that's my point, is if sex accounts for about 95% and then we include gender and then it shoots up to 100%. And I don't understand this, yeah, this idea.
Do you understand the difference between a woman, a biological female, having to cross-dress as a man in order to vote, having to pass as a man in order to vote, versus you know, a biological male who puts on a dress and makeup, you know, and tries to look like a woman, would be denied the right to vote. Like, it's still based on if you're a woman, you're discriminated against. Like, if you're a man, you have more rights and privileges. Like, it is based on gender is a construct, but it's a construct based on biological sex.
But what I'm saying is,
it doesn't exist independently of biological sex.
All I'm saying is if you look at 1,000 babies and you just put a diaper on them and there is no signifier, they're just blank babies, you'd probably get right their sex, I don't know, way less than 100%.
How is that relevant? I mean,
what I'm saying is we don't use signifiers. What I'm saying is,
though, like, we would have categorized babies by what sex they were observed at birth, and like, especially going back in history, like, the gender roles were so much stricter, and, you know, a lot of times female infants in certain societies were murdered immediately through infanticide, based on what their genitals look like.
What you're telling me, right?
You cannot say that isn't sex-based oppression.
What you're telling me is that you have to look at someone's genitals in order to determine their sex.
Well, in that case, I mean, female genital mutilation is oppression that only happens to biological females based on their biological sex, and genitals are part of biological sex.
What I want to hammer home this point is, if you don't have if you don't look at their gender, you're just seeing someone in public. You have no idea what they are. You can
tell about at least 90.
Yeah, that's my point.
Probably 99% of the time in public.
That's my point. But you're going to get them wrong sometimes. And I think that that's important to acknowledge. And if you want to say, yeah, you know what, it's 1% of the population, fuck them.
No, I'm not saying fuck them, but, like, I'm just saying, like, you can't deny that discrimination exists based on biological sex. Like, I don't see how, you know, some people intentionally, you know,
if a guy's
themselves to be androgynous and altering their voice, and
if a guy's harassing someone on the street, it is 100% based off gender. They have no idea what their sex was at birth. They have no idea what the doctor assigned them. What they're going off of is physical characterizations and stereotypes. And I think
so all women should have to do then is just look more male to avoid sexual assault.
Of course I'm not saying that. What do you mean?
Well,
no.
Because it's a sex-based oppression. If you look like a biological female, you know, a rapist, and the majority of times, I mean, yes, men get raped too, but like a much smaller number, you know, like most cases are men against women. Like the vast majority of cases of sexual assault are men against women. Of course. And they are looking at you and gauging if you have a vagina from looking at you. And you know, most women, the vast majority of biological women, an assaulter will be able to tell that. And yes, occasionally a man identifying as a woman can pass as a woman. Occasionally that is the case, but it's because they are appropriating the female form. They are trying to look like a biological woman. So that doesn't erase that it's based, it is sex-based violence, it is sex-based oppression, it is, and especially before we had medical transition, it's just to deny that there's any level of sex-based oppression. It's just not accurate.
Here's my point. I feel like whenever we try to say what is a woman, and I say it's the way that society treats
human female.
Yeah, but what is a female?
Female is someone who produces large gametes. It's a scientific definition, and in the case of infertility, they still possess organ structures.
What about those? What about the 1% of people who you would want to be calling cis women, but are not technically female because they've got some sort of abnormality with their chromosomes?
Well, DSDs are not a third gender. They're not a third sex.
Why not?
Because there's only two types of gametes. Eggs and sperm. There's no intermediate gametes. So
what if you can't produce eggs? That's a very common, or not common. I don't want to say common.
And you still have the structures. You still have the structures that could, if they were functional. And there's a small. I think it's called true hermaphroditism. Hermaphroditism that you can be basically a genetic chimera and have tissue that's male and female, but that doesn't take away from the fact that there's sex-based oppression. Like that argument.
What I'm saying
doesn't address that.
What I'm saying is oftentimes when you look at people and I could say that there is a slim possibility that we look at your chromosomes and it turns out actually it's not XX. There's some weird. But
even if my chromosomes weren't XX, I ovulate, I produce large gametes.
What if you don't ovulate? What if you're just talking to someone who looks like you, and for example,
because I don't see how DSDs have a place in this conversation.
Because it's important to acknowledge that we don't use sex to identify people. Because if we did, then we would look at someone. I don't know if you're familiar with castrosymmetry.
I've literally shared studies on how we do use sex to identify people. And we
get it right about 90% of the time. I would never disagree.
But as animals, we are biologically programmed to
we are also
take out biological sex. Survival and reproductions are the goals of any survival
but
and reproduction.
We've moved past that point.
A male representing another male, another male represents more of a threat, and recognizing a female is a potential sexual partner.
Sure. But hold on. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I want to address these points as they're coming across one by one, and then we can move through them. I don't want to. Yeah, a huge thing that you're saying there is it's biologically driven, and I would for sure agree with you. And say, yeah, this idea of sex and gender previous to how we're now trying to consider gender is 100% biologically driven. I don't think that's a good argument though, because there are plenty of things that are biologically driven that we want to say, okay, maybe we don't want this in society anymore. For example, racism is super biologically driven for survival. It's super important to say, hey, are you a member of my tribe? And if not, you might be a threat. Therefore, I'm going to be antagonistic towards you. And that was really crucial to a lot of our survival. But I hope that we have a place in society where we can say, actually, these things that helped us survive are now damaging us, and we don't necessarily need these restrictions on how we've survived because we're doing okay. Maybe we should drop these ideas of being antagonistic to someone who doesn't look like a tribe, and we can move forward to a better future. And I think that just because something's biologically driven, that should be irrelevant. It's what's best for people.
Going off of that analogy though, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people who are anti-racist and stuff like that, they say that we should acknowledge race. We shouldn't be colorblind. We should still acknowledge race, right? But
mm-hmm.
but the racism, the prejudice is what we need to let go of, right? So the biological ability to determine, that person has darker skin than me, we're never going to be able to not see like skin color. Like it's something we're going to see, but we need to remove the stereotypes like associated with that, like the racial stereotypes and like racism. So what I am saying is the same applies to biological sex. Like, you know, we can recognize biological sex in the vast majority of cases, but it's the stereotypes connected to biological sex, like women are subservient and women are weaker, and you know, they're just automatically more suited for care jobs and things that have hurt women. Like, rather than constructing identities based on, like, you know what, well, I think I fit, you know, the care role more, or I feel submissive sexually, or whatever, like all these stereotypes that we like have associated with the biological sex of female, you know, i.e. gender. Like, that is in your analogy, that is similar to the racial stereotypes that we should be trying to eliminate, not leaning into and propagating even more by saying that a man can be a woman if they identify with those stereotypes.
But I think I think that this idea, because plenty of people who are quote unquote progressive, I don't know, trans activists or whatever camp you want to put me into, would definitely say that, yeah, but you can still engage in those stereotypes and not be a man. Like, for example, drag is not be a woman, because drag is a very popular, you know, aspect of the progressive culture, I guess you could say. And we would never consider those people women because they don't identify themselves as women, even though they're engaging in those stereotypes of what a woman is. And I would also never disagree with that we should just tear away biological sex, because in some ways it's very important, for example, to determine if you want to have a child with a person. Of course, if you're looking to have a child with a person, you shouldn't just say, oh, I'm going to ignore whatever the gametes that they produce. Of course, that'd be ridiculous, right? It's, if you want to procreate a child, yeah, of course it's important for you to determine whether or not this person is viable to have a child with. But what I'm saying is, I think that sometimes we take this very important part of biological sex and we start expanding it in places that it has no room for. I don't think that it's anyone's business other than you, your partner, and your doctor, your biological sex, and everything else is socially driven.
Well, you know, women's I mean, as we've already talked about, you know, women's safety gets compromised when anyone can be a woman. So there's that. So anyway, like, I do think it's more important than just sexual partner and, you know, just doctor settings. But like I was saying, if it's true, and I know you disagreed with the study that I was pulling up, which is like, for transgender people are 4 times more likely to be the victims of sexual assault than the perpetrators. Let's just say that's true. Men. Sorry? But they're being assaulted by other men. They're not being assaulted by women. Like women are the ones that are still getting thrown under the bus. Biological females are the ones that are...
And trans women.
Well, trans women are assaulted by men.
True.
Not by biological females. True. You know, why should biological females have the responsibility to fix what is a male behavioral problem? Like, why do we have the responsibility to sacrifice our safe spaces and potentially be raped and potentially not be safe, you know, in order to solve a problem of male violence?
I would say that it's sort of society's problem, and we need to all sort of grapple it together. And I would say, I'm just sort of looking for any sort of prescription. Like, are you saying maybe we should have a cis female bathroom I like the single stall. You know, at my college, there's female bathroom with stall. There's the women's bathroom with stalls. Then there's the men's bathroom with stalls. And then there's a single stall that says all gender restroom. Like why can't we just have, you know, an all gender restroom installed everywhere? That would kind of solve the problem. I mean, you're saying,
I think it works very well. I think it works very well at my college. So I don't see why not.
So you're saying is, but I guess my question is, how is this enforced? Because oftentimes it's just enforced through stereotypes. Because, like, you look at trans women and they'll they'll run into if they pass well enough, they'll just go into a women's bathroom and no one will care. No one will turn a blind eye. And then sometimes...
but it's still an invasion. Not all women
how do you
are
enforce
comfortable
it?
with a biological male coming into their bathroom. So, like, I'm not saying that I know that you could enforce against that. Like, if they pass, then you don't know. Like, they pass, but, it is still entering a space without permission, essentially. So, and a lot more trans-identified males, a lot more of them don't pass than pass. Like, it's actually
Sure.
very difficult, to pass as someone who's transitioning to female. Like, a lot of them do not pass, and they believe that they pass, but they don't. And
I think that's...
I've been to trans support groups. I don't know what that means, because a lot of trans events, and more people don't pass than people who pass.
Sure, but I've seen people who sort of love doing this, like love going to, and I'm not saying you advocate for this or whatever, but like people who like harass trans people, and they're like, hey, we know that you can't pass. And I know a significant of people, the way that they determine it is really just based off of, if they're advocating for trans issues. And a lot of my friends who are cis women get told, hey, you'll never look like a woman. And it's like, dude, I was born a woman. I am just advocating for trans spaces. I'm cis. And it seems like you're just you looking at specific stereotypes, or like the way that my face is, that is just normal for me. That's just how I look. And you're sort of associating it with another gender. And that like, you're proving your own point. And this sucks for me too. And I think that we don't clock people as well as we necessarily think we do, where we can just say, like, oh,
well, no, I don't think we should. Look, I see what you're saying, and like, I don't think we should necessarily, try to enforce the bathrooms thing, because you're right, how would we? But I think having a gender neutral, having a gender neutral bathroom, I feel like just a single stall that's like gender neutral. Like, I feel like that would at least help some people because
Sure.
I think there are some trans women who, like, honestly don't want to make women uncomfortable.
For sure.
And they might, like, by choice, they wouldn't have to go in the men's room, and they would have a third option. And similarly, people that identify as non-binary or whatever could have like an option, and it is a small percentage of the population, compared to biological females who live as female. Like, it's a small percent of the population, so I think a single stall would be like appropriate. But I think the bigger issue is things like sports teams, prison, and locker room, changing rooms. Like that, I do believe needs to be it needs to be female only. It needs to be biological women only, and biological men, and maybe they could have, again, like a third changing space, co-ed or whatever.
Sure.
But that's the thing, is like, it has to be people's level of comfort, and like, most women want a women only changing room, and they don't want somebody with a penis around, like, in a spa with their little girls, like, or on, like, in the locker room for their sports team, and that's completely reasonable to be uncomfortable with that idea, and that is women's right to say, like, I have boundaries and I need my private space.
So, okay. So what you're saying is also trans men should not be in the women's bathroom either, correct?
Well, I mean, the thing is trans men don't pose a threat to men like trans women do to females. Like, there isn't that, that threat of sexual assault, or just, the statistics in terms of, like, the statistics in terms of male and female, and like who's committing most of the violent crimes and sexual assaults. Like, there is a difference. So, a trans man is more at risk going into a male space. Sure. Because of their biology. Mm-hmm. So honestly, I do think that it's a nuanced situation, right? Because, like, I do think it could make some women uncomfortable if there's someone who looks like a man but has a vagina, but ultimately that person does pose less of a threat to them than just anyone who says they're a woman with a penis being allowed in their space. So I think we need, again, maybe they could use the co-ed, or just maybe there's a few private showers, or something at facilities. And I think that is something that the trans community could advocate for. That would be a lot more well received versus just anyone should be allowed in the women's changing room.
So what I would say is, gender neutral bathrooms, that sounds like a great suggestion. I think that's sick. I think that would be wonderful for, as you mentioned, non-binary people. It would be wonderful for people who felt uncomfortable with maybe not passing, maybe not making other people uncomfortable. It's like, I'll just use this one. I'm not gonna, no one's gonna look at me, and then I'll dip out. And maybe when I feel a little more comfortable, I can pick one. But I think my point is, even in this gender neutral bathroom example, you're still having this issue where trans women can still just go into the women's bathroom and no one's going to side-eye them. And
can we maybe shift the conversation to locker rooms and prisons? And because as I've said, the bathroom situation, I don't know how you would enforce that, and I'm not advocating for enforcing it, because I can't. That's out of my control. But the prisons, that should definitely be enforced, and that is a situation where you can. Yeah, I mean, they literally pat you down and stuff, so they can tell what your biological sex. They've seen all of your records. They can definitely I think definitely in that case, and in the case of sports as well, and changing rooms, those are my bigger concerns in terms of women's safety.
Sure. So I don't have a strong opinion on prisons, especially sexual offenders, because I totally understand that hesitation. And I don't know if I'd have to think about that one a little bit more. But when it comes to sports, I guess the question is we would enforce that, the way that it's currently enforced, it's not just by identification. It's not just, hey, I say that I'm a woman, therefore I can go into sports anywhere. What it's usually is two things. One, hormone testing, and two, you need state identification. And for one, you usually need to have some sort of hormone therapy in order to have your testosterone your testosterone levels lowered significantly. And the second is the state ID, and most people who are just trying to, I don't think there's ever been a situation in which someone is just trying to game sports and fully willing to give up their entire state identification and all risks associated with that. So I don't see that as a huge issue.
Oh, I do. Because just taking I think the official requirement has changed actually, but for a long time it was 1 year of testosterone suppression and estrogen. And I'm talking specifically about trans women here, because you don't see trans men athletes shattering a bunch of male athlete records, right? It's always the trans women.
Well, I would say
trans-identified males who are shattering records set by biological females. And the thing is, just changing your hormonal profile is not going to change your skeleton. It's not going to change your lung capacity. It's not going to change the size of your heart. Mm-hmm. It's not going to change your center of gravity. There are so many biological factors that affect your performance as an athlete that give these athletes advantages over biological women that are not going to be overcome just by changing the hormones.
Sure. I would say a couple things to this. When it comes to... So how exactly would you suggest it be enforced then, other than hormone levels? What?
I think we need a co-ed, we need a sports league for trans athletes. We have the Paralympics or whatever, we need a separate division, because it's not fair for trans women to compete against women. It's not fair for trans men to compete against women. Obviously if they have testosterone, and also if recently there was a swimmer that actually defeated Leah Thomas, but he was this person had chest surgery and had their breasts removed, mm-hmm. and that is a huge aerodynamic advantage when it comes to swimming. Having no chest, having no breasts is an advantage. So we shouldn't have biological females competing with either categories of these athletes. And so, what we need is another, like, similar to the bathroom situation or whatever, like, we need another division. Like, the solution is not to put, people like Leah Thomas, Rachel McKinnon, Laurel Hubbard, like, like the fact that Laurel Hubbard got to the Olympics at like age 40 and was competing against these like 20-year-old biological women. I mean, even so, like, not having the best performance at the Olympics, like the fact that this person got to the Olympic level and took that opportunity away from a biological female, I don't think it's acceptable. Like, we have male and female sports for a reason, and it's to be fair to female athletes because we have different physiology.
So, a couple questions. One, sorry, I mentioned, I wrote down a couple things. One, there's probably, I'm sure you could see some arguments against, like, separate but equal when it comes to, like, some sort of trans league, where, like, the funding for that, there's no way that it's going to be even comparable, and, like, especially when it comes to, like, separate but equal is generally, like, morally not a great idea.
Well, I mean, it is for male and female athletes because, female athletes wouldn't have a place in sports if it was just all co-ed and not separate.
This is another...
women had asked for and fought for separate sports leagues for women. So in that case, sometimes it is important to separate the sexes, and, like, that is one example.
I'd have to double check you on that. Women asked for separate leagues, but
it was part of the Title IX. God, what is it called?
All Title IX says there needs to be equal.
It was part of the civil rights movement, like, where they were trying to create equal opportunities for women, and, like,
what Title IX did.
I need to be better researched on.
No, yeah, you're good, and I totally understand. I totally understand that there's certain aspects of this conversation where, like, we might have to just, like, have, like, a part 2 to this where we, like, okay, here are the sources. Let's talk about the things that we've actually discussed, and then look through it, because obviously I can't expect you to double check everything that I'm saying, and I can't expect the other way around. But unless I'm mistaken, Title IX just essentially said it needs to have the same funding between both sexes, yes. As far as I'm aware, I might be mistaken.
But then that's saying you need to put funding towards male and men and women's sports, right? Like, and part of it is that you can't just have women competing with biological men because they're not going to be able to. Like, that's going to exclude women.
Here's another question. Unless I'm mistaken, there are sports that women dominate in, like tennis. Isn't that correct? That, like, No, tennis. I think it's Venus Williams, or I don't remember if it's Venus or Serena, but Serena Williams ranks like 254th or something among men, and she's like number 1 in women. So no, tennis men absolutely still have an advantage. I mean, yeah. Okay, hold on. So you're saying Serena Williams is not? Hold on, 1 second. And I know she has, like, a sister, right?
I saw an article about it a long time. Yeah, Venus and Serena Williams.
Venus and Serena Williams, that's right.
I saw an article about it some time ago, but it's, even the best of the best, in women's tennis, they cannot win against the best man. And that is just, it's the testosterone levels, it's the skeleton shape, it's the stature, it's just there are biological differences that can't be overcome.
Sure. And I have a question because you were saying that there's an inherent biological advantage to having chest surgery. It makes you more aerodynamic. Well, for swimming. For swimming. I'm just curious. I just want to pick your brain. I haven't necessarily thought about the sports. I'm not very interested in sports, honestly. And I've mostly been focused on like the bathroom issues. So the fact that we're breaking away from that, I might not have a lot of great points here just because I haven't like delved deep there, to be fair. I'm just curious, just to pick your brain. Wouldn't you also say that there's just a biological advantage to having a smaller chest, which some women are just born with?
Yes, I mean that's the thing. Like female athletes need to be a class of athletes, right? Because there are variation between female athletes, and you could say some of them have genetic advantages against others, etc. And same thing like with the men. Like you've got Michael Phelps, and then you've got like your average.
Yeah, he's got like a wingspan of like swimmer. Yeah.
And so but the thing is that the variations between males and between females are going to be smaller than the variations across. And someone having their chest completely reconstructed, that is outside of a woman competing with her natural body. Like that. Okay, here's an example. Like women can have varying levels of testosterone, right?
Sure.
Like naturally.
Sure.
So actually women are being excluded from sports now that have naturally high testosterone. A couple of female runners they were disqualified from the Olympics not for doping but for having naturally high testosterone.
Which, to be fair, is a reaction against trans people.
It's happened because of having trans athletes.
It was meant to target. It was meant to target. Right, it was meant to target trans people, and it ended up just hitting cis people as well, right?
Well, yeah, and that's why we should divide on the basis of biological sex, not on gender identity. But anyway, to finish my point is that saying that someone who cuts their breasts off and competes is the same as a biological woman with small breasts. It's like saying that someone who is doping with testosterone, maybe they end up with the same testosterone as someone who naturally has higher testosterone.
So I would,
it's kind of a similar thing.
What I would say the only problem with doping isn't it's not even necessary. I would say that's generally okay. How the big problem that I have with doping, there is a problem that I have with doping, which is that you're going to create this sort of like arms race when it comes to doping, and then people are going to end up dead. Like, because doping is not good for you. It's not okay for you. And I don't think we see an arms race. I don't think we see an arms race of just people willing to cut their breasts off just to compete well in swimming. I think that these are.
No, it's not just to compete well in swimming.
That's my point. That's why I'm okay with it.
It does give an artificial advantage, though.
But that's why I'm okay with it. I don't feel like there's an arms race in. Like for example, baseball. The reason why we had to disqualify doping is because people were just shooting up, completely altering their body just so they can score a home run. And of course, that's not okay. Okay, you shouldn't disfigure your body just to score a home run.
I don't think doping is okay. I think doping is cheating, and I don't think it's okay at all for anyone to do that. I don't know where. I mean, I disagree that doping is okay in any situation. I believe it to be cheating. But yeah, I mean, regardless of the intention of getting, I'm sure that they are getting their breasts removed because of, their transgender identity. Like, I don't doubt that, but it is still an artificial advantage that I don't think should be allowed in the women's division.
I'm just curious because there's tons of artificial advantages that can come in sports. Like, for example, the amount of time that you spend in a weight room. Is everything good? Sorry.
But that's putting in work. That's not altering your body to give you a physical advantage. Like, I mean, sports competition should be about who's the best athlete.
Right, but
hours. Like, it should be about your dedication as an athlete. It shouldn't be about having body parts removed or doping. To give yourself a artificial advantage.
I mean, so. To be clear, I don't have a strong opinion about this one, but like, can't you hear that you're absolutely altering how your body naturally was as soon as you step into a gym, and like you're enhancing certain aspects of yourself and in
but I don't consider
sometimes
that
unhealthy ways.
That working.
Why?
I consider that because if you're an athlete, the goal is to get stronger, to get faster.
Right, which doping also gets.
But doping is cheating.
Why?
Doping is that is artificial because you don't have to put in the work. Like it takes work is honest sportsmanship, right? Like working out to achieve something like is honest sportsmanship. It's like taking a math test, right? And studying for it really hard and doing well versus cheating on the test and doing well.
I think
cheating your friend's answers, like it's two completely different things, and almost all of the major sports organizations frown on the practice of doping or anything like that, and just going from, I'm not talking about what's right or wrong, but just going from the stance of most major sports organizations, like they frown upon doping. They don't let people in leagues if they know that they are doping, and therefore a double mastectomy should also not be allowed in the women's division.
Okay. What I'll say is this is absolutely a part of the conversation I'm not well equipped to handle. I haven't done any thinking of, any research on. I'm sure I can think of counterexamples or maybe I might even side with you, or maybe I can find some sort of some median ground that's beneficial for everyone that I would agree with. But this one I'm just going to have to defer out of. Just for the sole reason of I don't know, and also sports is just so uninteresting to me that there's a reason I've kind of avoided the subject, and I'm so I don't know. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about? Is that okay to defer away from that conversation?
Yeah, I think I've said my piece.
Okay, for sure.
Sports.
Okay. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about, though? About anything else?
Let me just give a quick look through on here. I think we've covered a lot. I think it's been a good conversation, and I do understand where you're coming from about the James Cantor thing, and I will not cite him anymore because obviously I don't approve of that. I still don't think it's the same level as trusting a revolutionary theory and using it to dictate legislation, and I think just a list of studies is a little bit different than an entire theory of existence that we're now basing our lives off of. I think that is a different level. However, I do think it's important to stay consistent, and so I'll just try to just recommend the studies individually rather than linking to that article.
Sure, and that's fine. Well, I guess, and my point wasn't that we can just have different standings on that, because I say I'm not advocating for all of his positions, and I don't think his beliefs. Yeah, it's fine. But yeah, I appreciate that strive to be consistent, though. And
then thanks. And then also, I you have brought up a couple times that I don't seem to be compassionate towards trans people, and sometimes I do get caught up in the hate and the death threats and just the complete lack of compassion for me that I experience from a lot of them. But I do think that compassion is really important, and I'm not the enemy of trans people at all. I do believe trans people deserve all the rights that everyone else deserves, and they deserve to be safe. I'm gonna just and so, but I did want to ask you. I mean, I don't know if you ever thought of me as, I don't know, bigoted or transphobic or whatever, but that's something I get called a lot. And,
sure.
I want to ask you if I have properly communicated, that my concerns lie with
cis women.
The way this movement is treating women, and as well as the safety of children and even, adults who choose to transition, in terms of medical safety. I just wanted to ask you if you feel that I've if I've conveyed that, or if it just seems like I'm still talking from like a place of ignorance, or hatred or something.
Sure. A couple things. One that I wanted to say immediately, I wanted to cut you off, and I still want to say it, is if anyone's listening to this, fuck you if you're sending death threats to her. If you're a fan of mine, if you're a fan of sort of how I treat this, absolutely do not go after her. Doxing is bad. Death threats are bad. You're a piece of shit. I don't want you in my community. And yeah, so that right off the bat. And I'm sorry that that's happened to you, because that's obviously not okay. And what I would say is, I think from my view, and obviously people watching this can have different views, and I can't speak for everyone, but me listening to you, it sometimes feels like you are, it sometimes feels like you can be useful for bigots. And I don't think that you're a bigoted person yourself. I don't think that your sort of aim is to hurt transgender people, but I do think that your beliefs can sometimes piggyback. People can use that as a piggyback to harm transgender people, and especially like because you're not giving prescriptions and you're sort of like leaving it open-ended, people can come to conclusions that are harmful. And I don't think that speaks necessarily poorly of your character in any way. I'm just, I disagree with a lot of your takes, and I don't know.
I understand that, and but I also want to add that pretty much anything can be used as fuel for bigots. I mean,
sure, but
even trans ideology can be used as fuel for bigots. Like, I have people on my page telling me all the time, insulting me by saying that I look trans, and like insulting me by saying I don't pass as a woman, or or that I have a receding hairline, I have. And like trans ideology too can be used as a way to insult women. It can be it can be used as a way to reinforce stereotypes.
Sure.
So I just think anything can be. I think that bad people are going to use anything to support them having prejudiced views. So
all I'll say is a lack of prescriptions can often lead more people into that direction. That's all I'll say. And I would fully agree with you that, like, people can use things that I say for their own shitty, things. But I would generally say, when you're talking about a problem, you should probably give what you think is the best solution, so that people don't just come to the most extreme solution that they see fit.
I think I did throw out quite a few
solutions. No, you did, for sure. But
and I talked about, I also talked about, like, DBT and CBT and how, like, those aren't being studied. And it's the thing is like not having solutions or not having all the answers. Like, I'm also not an expert, and I think that the responsibility should be on experts who aren't coming up with solutions. And so I don't think the responsibility can fall on one person to have all the knowledge and like all the answers. Especially like people are always saying like that I shouldn't speak on trans people because I'm not trans anymore. I don't identify as trans anymore. And it's like, so when it comes to, solutions for how that group can be like more safe and protected and all of that, it's like, it's not really my I don't feel that it's my responsibility to come up with that. I feel like as a woman, I can speak on, well, hey, like, I feel like this threatens my rights. And I feel like I don't feel safe with, a biological male, like, in my locker room or whatever. That makes me uncomfortable. I feel like women have a right to speak out about that, and it shouldn't necessarily be up to them to come up with solutions on, where do we put these sex offenders who say they identify as female. Like, I don't really necessarily agree that it should be my responsibility to come up.
Essentially what I'm saying is, like, I sort of curbed it by saying, hey, don't send death threats. I think you should also probably say something like, hey, don't just bully any person that you perceive to be a man in the bathroom, and just say, hey, get out of here. And I think, okay, great, that's all. But I don't think that I don't think it's necessarily bigotry. I disagree with a lot of the points that you make. I disagree with, and I hope that's fair, But yeah, I'm glad that we had a talk. And if there's anything else that you wanted to talk about, we can certainly keep going. But if we want to draw this to a close, that's okay too.
Yeah, I think I feel complete with this conversation, and
Great.
I appreciate your I appreciate the opportunity to respectfully disagree.
Sure.
So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Really appreciate it. And yeah, I think we're good.